Welcome everyone to MogTalk. I don't know why it stopped so abruptly there on the intro. Maybe I need to learn what the fuck I'm doing. But if you guys haven't watched MogTalk before, it's a show based around the Final Fantasy XIV community, discussing everything from Savage Raiding to Chocobo Racing. And today we're going to be talking about the World Race, which of course is a huge topic for me and the guests that we have on the show. Before we go too much further into it, I do want to introduce all of the guests that we have here so you know who's here and they're not just kind of sitting there awkwardly. We're going to start with our newest guest, Mr. Max. Could you tell everybody who you are, dude?
Hello, I raid in WoW. That's me. My name's Max. I go by Maximum. That's my thing. You can call me Max. And yeah, I raid in WoW a lot. Like a lot.
The WoW guy.
All right, cool. Layla?
Yep, I raid in Final Fantasy a lot. I've been raiding, doing World First Progression since 2014, up until early 2020, question mark. Mostly play tanks. If you might know me from talking for way too long about boss fights and commentaries.
Yeah, that seems about right. And then finally, but not, the least, Sfia.
Yeah, I've been on here a bunch before, so if you've been watching Frosty for a while, you'll know who I am. Yeah, I'm pretty active in World Progression these days. I've been competing since 2016, I think, thereabouts. Yeah, currently in the big downtime though, so this is the content now.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that. I mean, this is like the big downtime for us, but like seriously, the big uptime for literally anyone else coming to Final Fantasy XIV right now. We were all expecting just to like AFK and not be with this game for 6 months, and then we had this huge surge of players come through. Which Max, you've played Final Fantasy XIV before, right? You're not completely new to it.
Very briefly. I mean, yeah, I literally boosted my guy to 70, leveled through dungeons up to 80. So I've done the dungeons, the roulettes and stuff. And then I did the MSQ, got the raids unlocked, and I have done the first Savage boss. That is my entire experience with Final Fantasy. That's it.
Okay. So, out of curiosity, you're huge, of course, in the world racing scene for WoW. I want to know what your knowledge currently is of Final Fantasy XIV's rating scene, if there's any at all.
Yeah. So, well, the hardcore differences between the two, or just because I don't
just what you know of it.
What do I know about Final Fantasy? Well, I don't know too much, to be honest with you. If I actually knew they were going on, I probably would have watched them in the past, or if I knew more about the game. But I've never actually watched the Final Fantasy Race World First, although I don't believe it's fully watchable. I think there's a lot of teams that don't stream.
Yeah,
that's my impression. That's just secondhand knowledge, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of differences between the two, just from what I've heard. Although there's a lot of good resources on this podcast for that. I've never had an actual sit down to talk about it, and a big reason for that is there's no true ultimate resource, right? There's no one who's competed at a world first level in WoW and also a world first level in Final Fantasy, right? That resource does not exist. Things somewhat close to that, where it's a little bit on one end. And that's why we have this conversation today. But there's no true resource like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of hard to tell the whole differences, but yeah, I mean, I guess I'm eager to find out. I'm going to find out myself personally. We're doing that I don't know if people in your chat are aware of that, but we're going to be doing a raid team, a mixture of some casual players, some hardcore players, some content creators, not a full, Limit and Echo team of players coming into Final Fantasy, but, just a fun team. And we're going to go through the raid content blind pretty soon. So really, to answer your question, I don't know too much about it, but I think we're going to find out some bit of it soon.
Yeah.
Obviously not the world first race, because I think it's still different min-eye level than it was then. But
yeah. I mean, there's a handful.
Not too much, actually.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
The good thing about it is that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, the good thing about it is that essentially we can give you the gear that we did it in the first time, and the tuning is going to be exactly the same. The only thing that'll be different is really minor job changes in terms of job power, and that's it. Very, very, very small. So you'll be getting.
Yeah, I've heard the bigger differences is if we go back and do 70 and 60 content. There's some weird scaling stuff, bringing your character down, because your new character, for example, might be balanced around having a level 80 ability, for example, but that level of 80 ability is not available to you during the 70 trial. So like the class balance is like a little weird, but yeah.
Yeah.
The secondaries scale very weirdly down to the lower synced stuff. And just some of the DPS checks are kind of not a thing anymore for them. But for all the modern content, you can make it as similar or not similar to like a week one experience as you want to make it.
I mean,
Cool.
To be honest with you, I think that's one of the huge differences too, is that Final Fantasy XIV, when the raids are released, there's not much changed about the fights at all. There's not a lot of patching that gets done. There's not anything. They're the fights they are. Except for like when we go back to maybe Heaven's Ward, when I think that was like the biggest deal. But I mean, that was 4 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, and to answer your question better, there are a few things that I know just off the top of my head. So I know you guys have a global release. I know you guys don't do PTR testing. I know there's not many add-ons in the game. I know that you basically learn the fights when you go into them. There's nothing else before that. But I also know that, like, I know the raid size is different, obviously, because I just set that up recently. And then also that you guys have, like, I think there's, like, a little bit different emphasis on the fights, and I'm not entirely sure how much that is true. The two people here would be great resources for that. Like, WoW is a fight where, like, well, first of all, I actually saw your talking point, so we'll get into this later. So I won't go, like, too much into it now. But WoW is a game where you could have the strat, the comp, and everything laid out in front of you on some bosses to where you literally know exactly what you need to do. Like, you could watch a video of someone completing it, and it would still take you 300 or 400 times just to be able to do it. Like, just to be able to do the thing in front of you. Like, just the pure damage, healing, tanking, throughput checks, and just every player's individual, you know, like, personal skill level to be able to achieve that. I don't know in Final Fantasy is how much of the difficulty lies in the added difficulty, which is really cool, of, you know, having to figure it out on the fly. I would fucking... Can I curse on here?
Yeah, you can fucking say whatever you want.
Oh, yeah. I would fucking love that. Like, that is, like, my exact skill set. That's why I find PTR testing more fun than anything else, because you are truly learning that on the fly. I love that. So I don't know how much of the difficulty is learning it in real time versus the actual personal accountability, throughput, personal player skill requirement. I don't know the difference of those things because I can't know, if that makes sense. So I don't, at least in that part of it, I don't know how much of that is different.
So when you say a fight taking 200-300 pulls, you know, with full knowledge already going in and just getting the execution down, you're probably talking about like the end bosses, right? The more difficult ones.
Specifically, penultimate bosses, so second to last mythic bosses and most mythic end bosses. The one recently, not too good, but the ones before that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is almost, you know, an exact type of number you'd expect out of a group going into ultimate and pulling it with guides, with full knowledge going through. So I think they're probably pretty similar in terms of that.
Because the number I'm giving you too, because obviously I can't relate ourselves. Like I can't give you our pull count on watching a raid video with a guide 2 months after progress and following it and doing it right, because our guild did it at the beginning. So that's like the casual, mid-level casual WoW guild doing it. And that's also you guys, the mid-level Final Fantasy guild doing it. Seems like there's similar pull counts. That's good.
Well, just to let you know too, Layla, you have a lot of experience with WoW raiding, don't you?
I have enough to speak the language, yeah.
Okay, I got you. And you did some pretty, like, at least with the Classic, you did some kind of cutting edge, like, server log on, try to clear as soon as possible raids, right?
Somewhat. I mean, we try to make Classic fun, so yeah.
Yeah, Classic stuff is a different game entirely than what we're kind of talking about here.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
Fair.
It's a fun little boomer game.
Gotcha. So, I mean, in terms of talking about difficulty, Layla, I want to get your opinions on that as well. You know, talking about the differences between the two MMOs and everything, and the fights just overall from your experience. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's an interesting topic because I think that I mostly agree with Sfia here, where when you're doing an ultimate, you can kind of expect a lot of the pull count to come from not only the learning curve and the blind process, but also from the execution. I think with the Savage fights, if you're given like a walkthrough or a guide to all of the mechanics, I mean, you're like drastically going to reduce your pull count in Savage because you can just lay down markers and this person goes here, this person goes there. Like healing throughput, the DPS checks, they're not super tight unless it's like a night one kind of thing. But for Ultimate, yeah, it's usually the song and dance, and the execution of that is very fast paced to where, you know, you're going to have like a 13-minute pull and wiping on the last 2 songs and dances and then back to square one. I mean, that's like hundreds of pulls dealing with that.
It's also hard to tell how many times you're wiping due to like a pure DPS check, throughput check, or mechanics, right? There's like a lot of, it's hard to tell because sometimes those things intertwine. Like pushing at a later time is a damage problem, but then becomes a mechanical problem. Like I think one difference that I believe of or I've been told is in WoW, a lot of the difficulty comes in pushing bosses at the right time because they push at % health and doing things like that. Where I believe in Final Fantasy, there's very little of that. It's much more like the fight plays out in its own thing.
Varies from fight to fight. Percentage pushes are pretty rare. Well, I don't know. It's kind of split.
They're far less common nowadays. The percentage pushes that do exist now are that they're put in place so that when you overgear the hell out of it, you don't skip mechanics at the end of the fight. That's the only real percentage pushes that exist in current content.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like the current WoW raid tier is a absolute disaster when it comes to stuff like that. Like now that we're in farm content, I'm not kidding you, on like most of the end fights, it is minutes of holding DPS and waiting until your cooldowns come up and just doing the phase without hitting it, just so your cooldowns are up at the beginning of the next push. Yeah, it's an overreaction. So they have a tendency of doing this where like if something is a problem in a previous raid, they like hard snap the other direction and make sure it's not a thing in other raids. Like something would be like Antorus or in Tomb of Sargeras, Tomb of Soak Garrus, as a WoW casual would refer it as there was too many soak mechanics. So like there was just like none forever after that. Last raid, Stone Legion Generals had terrible spell queuing issues, timing issues, and then now this raid, every single boss under a certain percent in every phase stops doing its main mechanics, and the phases are all like percent based, so you just have to wait rather than before. So it's like it's a big problem. But yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, that's not something that we experience much in Final Fantasy XIV, I don't think, unless if you're like.
Yeah, I've often wondered though if we should though. Like, see, because I'm kind of split because he has the other side of the spectrum problem where like there's too many percentage pushes and, you know, there's a lot of holding of DPS and things to line certain mechanics up. Over on the Final Fantasy side of things, we had a problem for many years that Square Enix like just could not figure out how to fix for like 2 expansions, where as you go through the farm process and you just get more gear and you get like max eye level, eventually you're killing bosses before they're doing like their really cool mechanics that they designed the whole damn fight for. So they had this weird balance they had to find of let's not have the bosses die before they do their really cool mechanics in max gear, but also not require percentage pushes. And for like 3 years, they just had the boss repeat mechanics for 50% of the fight, so that you did all the mechanics by 50%, and that was cursed. They're doing a lot less of that lately, but it's something that like I think Square Enix struggled with too.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think a large part of why these like sort of problems exist in different ways across the different games, and this is kind of based on a very limited experience of playing WoW and watching, is that WoW has just way more player agency than Final Fantasy does. Like as a player in a fight in WoW, you control more of how the fight plays out, whereas in Final Fantasy, the fight dictates what you do. And because of that, that creates those tuning issues much more egregiously in WoW, I think, than it does in Final Fantasy.
Okay. Which is really interesting too, because it's thinking about having more player agency also with a larger group size. Like I think the group size differences is something that I can actually speak to, not actually rating in Final Fantasy yet, but WoW used to have 10 mans. I think 10 and 8 are fairly similar, and I think a lot of the things that you would want in a 8-man group show up in a 10-man. Why so many WoW players want 10-man again is probably for not too many reasons. In fact, the raid content was really hard to balance back then. As much as people don't want to hear it, raid content is much better now that there aren't two different group sizes of the same difficulty because it was really, really hard to tune raid fights to have both of them be challenging. In fact, in most of the cases, 10-man was way easier. But then in some random cases, 10-man was way harder on bosses because like there weren't enough people to like do stuff. You know, you get it. But why people loved 10-mans was for probably no other reason than it's really, really, it's much easier to find 9 other people that you like, enjoy, and have the same passion level, want to play the same amount, and are of relative skill level than it ever is to find 20 or 25 at the time, right? I mean, that's in a microcosm why 40-mans are bad, right? For a ton of other reasons. 40-mans are bad because there was like, you know, bad internet at the time, and like just imagine wrangling 40 people to play a video game at the same time. For 20, where we have now, is like a really good balance. But I think like that's another big difference too, is that having to manage 20 people versus 8. I think 8 is just innately, I mean, it's something that WoW should honestly maybe even potentially look back into, because I don't think flex raids really solved that. The smaller group sizes is something where most other games are gearing towards now. It's a lot easier as a 5-man. Maybe you play League with your friends, maybe play Valorant with your friends, maybe play like another MOBA. It's much easier to find a few people to play Final Fantasy than it would ever be nowadays to like get into WoW and find your way into a 20-man group, if that makes sense. Like it's a lot more accessible at a lower level. But I think that comes with its problems too, as well.
So just I'm a huge supporter of the 8-man raid versus the 20-man raid and the 48-man raid and whatever higher raid that people want to do in their MMOs. Because I feel like it's a group of friends that you can work and have a conversation with and be in chat, like on Discord or something, and you're not like stumbling across 5 other people. I'm sure it's more organized at a world race level, but talking about like just doing a group casually, 8 is, I think, near perfect. I wouldn't want it to be too much smaller because I feel like 5-man, 4-man, that might be a little bit too small. But it also allows... on the world race side of things, it allows accessibility to where you can get 8 people together to contend in a world race versus 20 people. And trying to get
entry is a lot less high for like, they say there's like a new group that just they just watched a tier and they're like, damn, that looks really fun doing blind prog and stuff.
Yeah.
And it should be a system to where they can just get their homies together and go and join in on that, because that's, in my opinion, very subjective, but it's, in my opinion, the best part of the game. And it's nice that there's an option for like in a game to have the smaller barrier to entry. 20 is obviously not nearly as bad as like the 40-mans back in the day, or even the 25-mans. But it's still like the smaller group sizes where you can just get, you know, like Max was saying, like one group of friends that you play MOBAs with, maybe 2 of them, and just get in there and slay.
Yeah.
We're talking about barrier to entry though. Like, even in a perfect world where you have exactly 19 friends and you're all of equal skill level and all wanted world
That never happens.
And WoW, right? But let's say we're in that perfect world. That isn't the barrier to entry still, right? The actual things you need to do to be able to compete in WoW is just astronomically higher than it is in Final Fantasy. And
Well,
it's all just based on the systems of the game.
Yeah, he's talking about on the world race level. Yeah. The amount of time and effort you have to put in. Like, I know a lot of the stuff in Final Fantasy is really streamlined. Like, the raid comes out, you like craft gear, and like at a general level, you're like kind of good to go. Where in WoW, it's like a ton of PTR testing. Oh, okay, the PTR testing is way over. Like, there's not much PTR testing at all. It's more the like time you put in strategizing for the raid after the information you know from that. That's very time consuming, and then also the systems that are in WoW. It's actually better now than it used to be. In BFA and Legion, it was very bad. It was like, I mean, 16 hours a day. Just imagine a simple, repeatable, mundane task being forced to do it for 2 weeks for 16 hours a day just to get like the smallest of smallest character power increases. There's consistently systems that exist. Obviously, we all hate it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's obvious when you're talking about game design, it's designed for, you know, the random player, the most players who play WoW, like at a lower level, right? Like it's supposed to like keep them playing the game for months, right? Like, character progression is really important. If you look at a game like Diablo or PoE, if you logged in season start with actually best gear, best stats, or in Diablo's cases, full like ancient perfect rolled gear, you'd play for like 10 minutes, right? Like the fun in games like that is making your character stronger and getting better and stuff like that, right? So like what MMOs have really played around with is the idea to get your character stronger, and then having that feeling of getting stronger last longer because you want to play their game longer, making it a better game, right? You want in MMOs, it's all about lengthening the time in which you feel like your character is constantly getting stronger. And I think those are the ideas for those systems, and they've certainly hit or miss on them. But for the world first race, it's like always this constant, like, can't save world first raiders from themselves. They're always going to do every small thing for the biggest advantage.
Yeah. I would say, to kind of counter that, I think the MMOs today are filling with a lot more casual players who aren't happy about having to spend that amount of time to get to that level, or casual raiders. They're not like they're not looking to play one game 16 hours a day for months to get to like a higher level now. And I don't know if that's just how it is now, but that's the mindset, at least Yoshida has said over and over again, the producer for Final Fantasy XIV, is that he wants people to play, have fun. When they've done what they want to do, just leave, do something else. He doesn't want them to, like, keep playing constantly. I mean, business-wise, yeah, having them sub every single month is what you want, but that's his whole defense to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Like, I think that's what most games are now. Is they're seasonal, or you play them and you put it down and you maybe pick it up again. That's what games are now.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, if your game has figured that out, then that is I think, I mean, that's, first of all, that's exactly what all of us do. like 90% of our guild, we do the world first race, we play a couple times a week, hang out with our friends, and then we play other games until the next raid comes out.
Yeah. I think
going back to what you said earlier, Max, about just from a game design standpoint, and that acquisition of power, feels good, that sort of thing. There is a flip side to that in Final Fantasy, where that acquisition of power just means significantly less, and that feels bad, right? Like you were talking about how the upgrades that you get in game for the world progression, like in that time frame, it's the systems that are shitty as opposed to the actual feeling of getting gear.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy goes the complete other end of that spectrum and doesn't really give you anything to work towards other than raid loot.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an upside and downside to that. I mean, that's what he's saying, is like the feeling of getting loot in WoW is probably one of the incredible things that keeps people playing, because truly, like, getting a really sick item that makes your character X amount stronger is awesome. Like that feeling is what you strive to get. So that's something where the accessibility in Final Fantasy is higher, but the dopamine hit of getting that item is not as high.
Yeah, and I would kind of say that it is true for people who are like in the world race, but if you're not in the world race, getting that gear does feel good because you're watching your FF logs number constantly and seeing how you can boost that more. So there is like that excitement to getting the gear from the raids and everything else. But that you don't think so, Layla?
You said FF logs, and I.
Oh, okay.
Yep, that ain't me.
I was gonna ask, do people care about logs in Final Fantasy at all?
I think there's I don't know. I used to think that there was a much larger subculture for log, like parse runs and just caring about logs in general, like during farm, in Final Fantasy. But then I raided WoW, and I feel like both games, there's just a large subculture that really love 99s. And that's just what they fucking live for.
Yeah, I mean that definitely exists in WoW. Although I'm not surrounded by it much. What I've found in WoW is that, well, first of all, every good player I've ever played with at one point loved it because that's how they got good, right? Like they tried as hard as they could to milk out any damage they ever could, and those are the players that I play with now that never care about logs ever. But they almost had, including myself, almost had to at one point to get that way. However, none of them do now. I think for a lot of people, getting high logs in WoW is a way to validate you. It's a way to say, I am a really good this. But then once you get into higher guilds, and I really don't associate with a ton of people outside of my guild or guilds around it, so I don't, obviously I'm willfully, like, I'm away from this culture now, even though I used to be in it a lot, where almost no one in our guild would ever care about logs. Like it's never spoken of. No one, and it's not like it's a taboo thing. It's just that genuinely no one cares. And I think it's because the guild that they're in and what they do validates them rather than the need to be validated by a number. So in a lot of ways, it just gets shoved down the things you would ever care about, right?
That's actually a really good point to make, is that Final Fantasy 14, well, it has, like, we call them free companies instead of guilds, right, in 14. But while people kind of care, they kind of don't. It's more like a social thing. People, the groups that get together to actually compete in the world race and do everything, they're known by their group name, not by the guild they're in or the FC they're in. And that's the interesting part. So the only real big, huge validation is this number that shows up on a website, or people just know.
Yeah, and I think one of the bigger problems too, and that makes sense, but also just on the log point, I don't know if this is the same in your game. And we talked about pull counts earlier too, which was kind of a weird way to start because like I'm a very like pull count is such a bad indication of difficulty because there is so many there's so many variables to that. Like in our game, for example, like the two like top guilds, Echo and us, like we pull completely differently. Like in an hour, we'll pull 30 to 40% more than them, but still have similar results. So like it's the you know, there's like gives and takes with that. There's and a million other things, right? Bugs and how long the fights are and everything like that. But with parses, it's like that too, where at least in WoW, I think a real big reason why parses aren't a very huge thing that like a lot of like top level players look at is because it is just the smallest percentage of like if you were to look at a pie chart of showing if you're good. Like it is important. Like if you're playing at the top level, you need to know how to do that. But I mean, that's just such a small thing about what makes you good at the game, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think a lot of good players agree with that in Final Fantasy 14. Just a lot of people need that
That's the general consensus these days. Like, it's not only that, it's just that, like, yeah, sure, you need to know how to do damage, but that's like, one, it's quantifiable. You have metrics there to show that you've got improvement and that you can meet those checks and those standards. But the other soft skills that aren't measurable on FF logs, those are the things that people who are really, really good at the game have that you can't actually look at a resume that someone gives you and see that they're good like that. So that's why the recruitment process in probably both of these games is really fucking difficult.
It's extremely difficult. Yeah, it's extremely difficult. And also, it's like looking at parses, right? Like, if you ever want to recruit a player, you have to like deep dive their progression logs because I'll use random terms. A good WoW player and an amazing like top level WoW player, 60 to 70 attempts into farm on a boss, their damage will look very similar. Because the good player over an amount of time will figure it out. The real thing is the people that are good enough at their class to be doing that damage on pull number 5 and also never die. You know what I mean? And it's so hard to quantify that when recruiting. Like, how do you find that? You have to basically, I mean, at least in our game, I haven't looked at an application in years. The only way we recruit players is to have word of mouth from other people that play in our guild. That's the only thing I care about is having someone in my guild say that you are good. That's the only way I will ever recruit you. And that because there's truly nothing else you can go off of.
It's an interesting problem. It's one that I think has existed in 14 for a while as well. I know I was talking to Zeppy about this not even like a week ago in chat of where how do you trial somebody for like a world prog team? And it ends up being like you try to recreate week 1 experiences, like throw them into a fight that you guys have never done together, put on the lowest gear possible that you can equip, and just go through them and try to see like, oh, how does this person react to a first time experience, and like, how are they gaining their uptime here? Are they, what are we looking at in a week 1 experience? And I don't know if I have the answer, but I think it ends up being kind of the same way in 14 because of that, where it does end up being word of mouth a lot at the top, which is unfortunate. I've been kind of realizing because I think there's a lot of really good players just gated behind the fact that nobody wants to gamble on them. And I don't know. I don't have the solution for that right now.
Yeah.
So do you guys not try? That's actually a good question for you. What is your all's trial situation like in an 8-man raid? Like for us, we have a 20-man raid. We have certain amount of tanks and healers. You normally always just keep your 2 tanks. You don't like recruit new tanks in WoW to like trial over them. That's very, very different. Part of the reason why, different topic, but why tanks in WoW are usually pretty bad is because there's a lot of complacency. They never recruit to replace a bunch of other things that other classes have to deal with or other roles. But like, you usually have like 5 healers, maybe you trial 6, and then DPS, it's like fair game. Like you just recruit so many DPS players at most guilds, at least, to see, like if they can make improvements. I wonder so for example, we have a 20-man raid. We usually have a 29. World first guilds are way different because you need so many options. Mm-hmm. Like I would say Echo and us probably have anywhere from like 28 to 31 players on the raid, which is like 50% more than the actual what's required in the raid. And then obviously more people outside of that, data scientists, weak aura people, a whole other slew of things, but just actual raiding members that, so yeah, basically that's basically it. So what is it like in Final Fantasy as far as like the roster you keep and the trialing process?
So the rosters are, there's never really been a team that I know of that's had any type of cycling of players, and while it's still active. In a tier, it's like you take 8, you go to the end, unless like someone is forced to drop out for external reasons. There are like support, maybe 1 or 2 people, and then like crafters and things like that. But the people that you bring into any fight are expected to be there from start to finish. It's kind of, that's the norm. I think it's a pretty underutilized area of the game, and the way that it could get more competitive. But I don't think many teams would be willing to make that jump there.
I mean, it makes sense. Like, how do you ever go to that? Like in WoW, it's commonplace. Like you might have to sit a month. You might be a member of the world first raid team and not kill a boss in that raid if your class isn't good enough. But I think most of it. Maybe I phrased the question. You answered exactly how I phrased it. I think I just didn't say exactly what I was getting at too. Is I think a lot of it comes down to the way the class balance works. So like in WoW, there's a lot of class options, and more specifically, you have class stacking. In Final Fantasy, you are very heavily incentivized. I believe it used to be worth it a long time ago, but not anymore. You're very incentivized to bring no 2 of the same spec, and the game penalizes for doing that. Where in WoW, there is a little bit of that, which we hate. There's like raid buffs. There's like basically 6 of your 20 spots are basically taken by required raid buffs and debuffs. I hate that. I wish I had all 20 spots to do whatever I wanted. But that is something to where that's probably why there's extra people, right? Because you need to have the option to run 5 of this thing on a fight. And that's also something that I think that I don't like about Final Fantasy from what I know about it so far, is that, like, for example, let's just say WoW raids are 20 man and you had to run, like right now there's 6 required raid buffs. Let's say there's 16 or maybe 20, right? Like all of them. Like you have a comp and that's it. I would probably quit. I'm serious. Like that, like part of what's so fun for me is figuring out a way to outthink other people and figure out what exactly the best comp is. No guild is ever completely correct with that, and where you come in, how much you test, like what's going to be good on a certain fight really matters going in. And that's something that I think, well, I don't, because I think Final Fantasy is like a little different too, so it's hard to tell, but I just know that's one main difference that would, like, if WoW had that same philosophy, I would really, really dislike it.
I think it's another agency thing, right? Where it gives you more ability to make choices that impact your performance in the raid. But something that I think that the 2 games do very differently is that WoW rewards what you do outside of the raid instance more than Final Fantasy does. Final Fantasy, the way that you perform on world progression is you go into the fight, and then what do you do from pulling that boss to killing that boss is all in there. That's where the actual like meat of progression is, as opposed to the things that you do external to that. Whether it be the way that you allocate loot, whether it be the way that you stack your classes, all those sorts of things. That means so much less than it does in WoW.
Yeah.
I would say just my quick thoughts on that is the players, they have to be good at multiple different jobs in case the balance changes. So their same character, they have to know every single tank. Usually.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. That's where I was going to bring that up. That's where the intersection comes into it, to where if you have, let's say your comp is 2 tanks, 1 melee, 1 caster, 1 range, then 1 X. The range player feels like he needs to know all 3 range. The caster player needs to know all 3 casters. Some of them probably play a lot more roles too, but like let's just keep within role. Like the melee. In fact, I think it's important in WoW to have like a bunch of like game knowledge to know other roles and other parts of your roles, so you like know more about the game. Let's just say just within the role, healers will know healers. So while you are running 8 people, yes, there is an expectation where those players need to be able to potentially play more than one job. Sorry, I'm gonna keep saying spec, but
That's fine.
and then in WoW you have a mixture. You have like one trick players. You have players that one trick very popular classes like most mages, hunters, moonkins, warriors, stuff like warlocks. You have a lot of one tricks there because the classes are they're just designed so well that they're always good. And then also it's like a very stackable class. So, and then you have like that, and then based on the rate tier, you have a bunch of multi-classers that just swing to whatever's good. So it's like 2 different roles of a player, kind of.
Yeah, and we could talk about Sfia, who had to do red mage and like grinded his teeth together the entire time he was progging.
Yeah, Sfia is a really good example of what he's already been talking about. So I mean, primarily a caster player, right? Most people know that. We and his current team have had him flex all 3 casters for God knows how long, and sometimes it's something he doesn't really want to do, but it's like a necessary evil. And then you have what's become, I think, more popular in Shadowbringers is the flex guy, who flex seals the group, and he's kind of the 4th DPS slot. Where are you doing 2 melee, 2 range? Are you doing 1 melee, 3 range? He's got to know a lot. Like, he's got to be flexing to a melee. He's got to be flexing to multiple ranged. So that role is a lot more top heavy than, say, your Dark Knight, who gets to sit on Dark Knight the entire expansion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of similar in WoW, where it's like some people have a lot of responsibility in terms of being able to multi-class or multi-job, and then other guys are super top heavy in it. Yeah. But everybody should at least know their own role.
Yeah. What is the so I don't know what's like really required in like Final Fantasy raid bosses. I'm sure there's like some that are majorly single target and some that have like 2 target, some that have 5. Is there a big discrepancy? Now I've been told in Final Fantasy that a lot of people, a lot of classes end up performing similarly. Like the class balance has been pretty good, at least in like a pure single target situation. Something that I actually like about WoW is that there's a lot of classes that are not very balanced in single target, but like it makes sense because they, like a Windwalker is a good example right now, a class in WoW. Their single target's really bad, but they are just like the best class in the game on AoE in like in a raid AoE situation, 4 to 5 targets than like any class, and it's like by a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like you can actually make the creative pick. Like, man, I don't know if we could run a Windwalker on this, but like, man, if we could swap it in for this thing, that would be so good. Or maybe you can stack them because of that. Moonkins have tremendous spread out AoE. Right now, they also have like a really, really impactful cooldown that it's like, oh, maybe we can run a few of those. But if you run too many, then, if they do all their damage on a 3-minute window and they do literally 0 damage outside of it, it's not steady at all. It's very bursty. Like, you need to surround that class with things that fill in the gaps of what that class is bad at. So, like, I find that thought process very, very interesting in WoW, to where I don't know if I would prefer to have all classes be around the same, or to have classes have massive peaks and valleys of what they're good at, because as a decision maker and a person being creative with it, it actually gives you a lot more interesting choices.
There are definitely jobs in Final Fantasy which have defined strengths. There are the 2 target jobs which definitely find like hot swaps that just happen mid progression. And it's actually on the team. Like that's just one of the skills that comes in being a progression team, identifying when these hot swaps should happen. And like, the caster spot is probably a really, really good example to talk about with this, where if you're going into a fight which you think is going to die in sub like 100 pulls, sub 50 pulls even, you bring the red mage. If you're going into a fight where you're going to be seeing 100 plus pulls, the black mage brings more value once you get past the point where the red mage raises are there for learning reasons. And then if you get to 2 target, then you're swapping to summoner as soon as you see a phase, and you can just blast that phase out the water. All of these things kind of exist, so it's really, really similar in that regard. But that is all done by one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the interesting thing, is you don't have to have multiple characters, right? You can just have multiple jobs leveled within one character, and that person can just instantly swap. Maybe they need like a new gear set or something, right? But it's something like that. But yeah, that's really interesting, because I feel like that process is there. It's just like a little bit different. And now, while I think it depends on the way you play the game. Like for me, this is literally like I'm one of very few people who probably enjoy this, where classes are massively, massively different in certain situations because I am the person that can, move the chess pieces around and figure that out. It's a puzzle. It's fun. Where probably the most of the WoW community, which take most of the WoW community's opinion with a grain of salt. It's pretty bad, especially right now, but like certainly has been for a while. But they probably, if a certain percentage of the game is an enhanced shaman main or a whatever main, just like a class that isn't very, very meta, they do have their strengths, but they never feel quite strong enough or that strength isn't required. So just for years, they're considered not viable. Then that's a much bigger problem than what Final Fantasy has. No, that's also an overblown problem. Every class has been viable for a very long time. And a lot of people, I don't know if this is the case in Final Fantasy as well, they look at what the world first racers do and they consider that the meta and what you need to run.
It was really bad for WoW.
And in WoW, it's like if you don't do what, and it's wrong too. Like these people will do a raid 2 months after we do it, and they're like saying, "Oh well, and I hate when people do this. Like, oh, Limit Maximum brought this, and here's why he brought this, and here's why." But like those decisions are totally different with 2 months more gear. Like the boss is so much different. The what's hard about the boss now is totally different. Sylvanas is a perfect example. The comp we ran for Sylvanas was to meet the P1 DPS check, which was extremely hard, right? Now there's no DPS check. It's literally gone. If you progress that fight and right now, if you're on Sylvanas, there is 0 DPS check. If you move all of your cooldowns to all the ad sets and not on the boss anymore, which totally changes your comp. You want ads that like shred AoE and you don't care about single targets. So like when people look at comps, they just have like the total wrong idea and they usually end up, I don't think it's bad in Final Fantasy because again, the balance is just innately better between, especially in like most scenarios, but man, in WoW, it's really bad.
So the community response to it, I think there's a couple reasons why it's probably a bit more diluted than it is in WoW. One of them is that the amount that people need to learn to have like an educated opinion and form an actual thought about why people are doing things, they only need to know how many DPS jobs, like 11, as opposed to how many DPS specs there are in WoW. So they're simply like, they have to know less to be able to understand reasons that things are done. And also it feels like because there are less defined strengths within the Final Fantasy jobs, it's more clear why things are done as opposed to looking at how this thing interacts specifically with this fight. It's more just like, what does it do as its overarching sort of job identity?
Well, I will say that one thing, we do have that issue in Final Fantasy XIV where people see Sfia's group or Layla's group clear something and then they'll look up and they're like, oh, they had this gear, they had this material, they've done this, they've had these jobs. And the worst part is they'll say they did this strategy. And what they'll do is do a horrible, unoptimized strategy, and that will stay in the game forever. And everyone who like gets together and does a raid group, they would do a horrible strategy because that's what they know. That's what people do.
There are a lot of strategies that it's like, okay, this works. It's shit, but the DPS check is really easy. We're just going to roll with this rather than lose like 3 pulls coming up with something better. And then as soon as the tier over, it's like, that's the pug strat. It's like, please, God, no, this is bad. Don't do this.
Dude, you are saying all the right things. This happens in WoW constantly where, the same thing that we were talking about, what was required week 1 is totally not required later. But more so that I feel like people restrict their own thought processes. And why it's really hard to ever try to be a raid leader at a world first level is because you're never put in a position before that to train for it. Like what you have to do at this level is make every decision while people are, behind you are raiding, like having more efficient raids because they're doing what you're doing. And you have to come up with something that works and like be good at that. But how do you ever get that experience if every decision you've ever made was also with the help of someone else's kill video, right? So that trickles down all the way through the community to where what's really fun for this game, that why I play it right now, does not exist if I rate it at a lower level, because it's so hard to tell a group of people, hey, this strat that you've all seen it and you know that it works, here, I want to try this. Because a lot of times it's a lot easier to do even potentially a suboptimal strat that works than it is to ever convince a group of people, especially in WoW, a larger group of people, that no, I want to do it my own way. So you struggle to actually like get into the part of the game that's really, really hard and like figure out that stuff. I wish more people would do that. That's why blind progression in Final Fantasy is really, really fun, and more people should do it. Is you get to go through those thought processes yourself, right? I wish more people would do that.
Yeah, I think
I want to
go ahead.
I want to talk about something that you just brought up then, which was how what you do in the raid and your job, you don't have a situation where you can practice it, right? That there is a huge problem in Final Fantasy, particularly for world progression. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same in WoW, in that the point of practice is to like simulate the performance, right? But there is, because what we're doing is a PvE like environment based thing, there is no way to do that in a true like one-to-one nature. But if it was a PvP game, you just have PvP stuff going on, right? And you just keep simulating those environments that you'll be in. But PvE, you cannot create a situation which one-to-one mirrors progression. So in terms of like preparation stuff, I feel like WoW is probably really similar in that the actual act of preparing your group for a raid team is you have to be really creative. Do you find the same thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, it's what makes it really hard to recruit people too. Because like you can recruit people off of a good vouch, but like you're never going to know how they play in that situation until you put them in it, because there's just absolutely nothing you can do to recreate a progression environment. And that's kind of along the same point, right? Yeah, there's no way to do it. I guess in WoW you have like the PTR fights, so you get to see a glimpse of how people innovate and like adapt to something very new. And that's something you can see. But even then, and which is why a lot of people don't understand like the PTR testing in WoW, it's just so different than what you fight. It's so fucking buggy, and like there's a lot of things there where like it is not as big of an advantage as you think it is. But yeah, it is you at least get to see how someone will react to something new, where there is quite literally nothing you can do outside of it to do that.
And you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the world race team, at least in Final Fantasy XIV, you figure that out by doing a world race, then seeing how the teams perform during that race, then you recruit again afterwards, or the group falls apart and you find people who did well and you make another group and you just go forward. Because
I mean, hopefully your group doesn't fall apart, because that's like one step forward, one step backward kind of thing. I think NA had a really bad turnover rate for a couple of years, because of what you're saying, where you need to go through a tier with somebody to see like how well they're going to do. Is this team going to fit well? We're not going to know until we actually try a tier together. It's literally because of that teams need to stay together, because the more turnover you have, you're just back to square one of that awful situation of you have no idea how we're going to perform together. At the beginning of expansions, it's kind of cooler because it's really, I mean, it doesn't simulate a Savage or an Ultimate fight at all, but you can at least like rush the extreme primals that are there, because at the beginning of expansion, the raid doesn't launch until 2 weeks later, which is not how the later patches mid-expansion work. So you can like rush the extreme primals, take a new group through those, see how you prog together, see how you problem solve together. And it's like, oh, okay, we got someone we can work with here, or oh, okay, Layla is a troll and we need to replace him. So
yeah,
that's like the only thing.
Yeah, and attitude is huge. I think player attitude and how you mesh with them, like what you're saying, Layla, they have to like fit together pretty well, right?
Yeah, you don't know if somebody's just gonna like scream at you.
Yeah, player attitudes are huge in MMOs. I think that's maybe something where I think 8-mans, in my opinion, are probably a lot easier than 20-mans in that regard, because you just have so many more personalities that all it takes on a hard raid day is one person to sigh openly, or just be like, oh, I'm not feeling it. And it just fucking kills the vibe. I mean, it's just gone, you know? All it takes is like a couple of bad pulls and someone to sound like they're not having a good time. And it's just done, you know? And I think, yeah, having an MMOs specifically, I think the way I try to relate it to people who don't play video games, at least for WoW, is I'm like, imagine you're at a job, right, that you really like, by the way, and you're doing a group project with 20 people that everyone's super, super passionate about, and you have to try to make that work, right? It sounds like a nightmare, because it is. It's really, really hard to find, you know, a group that really is on the same level. And I think more than anything else, the thing that I found to make it easy, and I'd be interested to hear how the like morale works in a long Final Fantasy farm and like an Ultimate, is I think the most important thing is for people to instantly move past mistakes and understand that they were made, and like just like if I'm ever asking a question to someone, it's to solve a problem. It's never to call you out personally. If you're playing with a good player and they make a mistake, they already know that, right? You don't need to berate them and tell them that they made a mistake. But it's more that that person acknowledges they messed up. Instantly, we talk about it and then move on. And if you can get in a habit of doing that, there's virtually no issues. And you have a really good time, like really, because like I think maybe people get this from watching our guild. We have such an emphasis on having fun. Having fun is truly like every guild has their happy medium. For us, it's joking around. We literally have our best pulls ever when we are totally joking the whole time, and that's at the very highest level. If you're not having fun, you're playing like garbage, straight up. So I just think it's important to get a lot of people that are on the same page, and especially as a leadership group, leading by example and certainly making it known what is acceptable when making a mistake, because everyone's going to goof. The best players in WoW are going to mess up a lot. It's really hard. It's going to happen. You can move past yourself and kind of get over that. It usually gets a lot better.
Yeah. Sfia, Layla, you guys have had a lot of experience with that too, right?
Oh, let's go
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. The people who tend to stick around and they're like the top performers in role progression and stuff are typically the people who have just a much more level head. I think at some point everyone comes to understand that, the things aren't personal, that sort of thing. The calling out of mistakes isn't a calling out of mistakes. It's an identification of problems, which is just for nothing but the betterment of everyone around them sort of thing. But I also think that, like, this is kind of mean to say, but MMO gamers are just typically getting older. We were talking about this before the show. Like, we're all old as hell. And that's a maturity thing as well. I think that progressively throughout the time I've played the game, the groups that I've been in have been much better and better at dealing with this exact problem that we're talking about. So maybe it's just because I'm becoming a boomer myself, but I also think it's, people around me. But the other thing is that I think the players who tend to stick to the top as well are typically the people who are the hardest on themselves, as opposed to like having to be berated themselves. Anyone who takes ownership of that sort of stuff is just intrinsically going to just better themselves in their play, which just by nature brings them up towards the top of the performers.
I think people like that rise to the top. Something I've noticed a lot while being in games, and I've played other MMOs, I've played WoW, I've other parts of the WoW community. The people who end up rising to the top and being like the best of the best are usually the people that have a lot of humility, and they look at the mistakes they make and they they apply that. They do, like you said, it's problem. Identifying mistakes is problem solving. You're finding out why it happened and fixing it. Sometimes a mistake is just, dude, I just fucked up. That's fine. But like, if it's more than that, it's important to identify what went wrong. The reason why I said those people rise to the top is it's because it's actually, I don't know if this is true in Final Fantasy, because this is definitely true in WoW. The like really toxic people, like the people that are perceived as toxic in the high-end community, are never usually at the top. They're usually right under the top, and it's because they're very talented, but they don't have the like right mindset to get better. Like, quite literally, if you can't admit to your mistakes, you're like directly holding yourself back from ever getting better. Like making a mistake and learning from it is like a primary way of learning and getting better. And those people usually rob themselves of that. So they get to near the top because of talent, but they never get above that because they don't possess the right mentality to actually like go to the next level. I don't know. Is that exist in Final Fantasy at all?
I would say that most of them are
on an extreme level. Yes.
Yeah. A lot of them end up in just Party Finder, to be honest with you. And you see that toxic attitude just because they can't deal well with their group, and so they have to find random groups in Party Finder, and then they just shit on them, and that's the Party Finder life for a lot of people. I'm in Party Finder a lot, but I'm not toxic. I'm a great person.
But keep in mind, I think in Party Finder or just grouping up with random people, I think you're going to run into that mentality where people don't want to admit their mistakes a lot more, and it's because they don't know you. Yeah. Like if someone you don't know is like, "Hey, dude, the fuck happened there?" There's gonna be like it takes a really strong mental to like actually give a legit answer to someone that sounds aggressive, asking you why you made a mistake, right? Because you don't know that guy. It all comes down to respect, right? When you raid in a guild that's really good and you all have respect for each other and you as the person maybe criticizing them or calling them out or fixing a problem, if they respect you and they know that you respect them, you can say pretty much anything to them as long as you're not an asshole. But that fundamental line of respect does not exist in a pug group. Pug groups are totally different.
Absolutely.
You just have to figure it out. Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Being able to self-reflect, I mean, that's like, say barrier to entry again of getting to the top level, but it also exists, beyond that as well, where I'll use like a really real-time example that happens a lot in progression where, 3 people died to a mechanic, right? And you're probably the cause of it. You need to identify that, like, okay, there's something I'm doing wrong, and I need to adjust what I did there because the 2 other guys in Discord are speaking up like, oh shit, well, okay, I can change this, I can change this, I can change this, but that's like way more effort than just going, wait, no, this is my problem. I fixed this, we're good. And if you can't self-reflect and identify that sometimes you're the problem, sometimes you're literally stunting your progression because you're just causing more problems by making more people adjust.
I will say
one of the first things.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think one of the first things that I was ever told, well, not told, but that Klops ever said when I was in the raid was, anytime there's a mistake, the first thing, or anytime there's like a wipe, any type of failure, you die, even if it's your fault or not, your first response shouldn't be, why did I die? It should be, what could I have done better to avoid the situation? And then, the person who puts their hand up the highest is going to be the one who probably, if everyone's thinking that way, the person who puts their hand up the highest will be the one who should be taking action.
I was going to say the interesting part about this is that we're talking from a perspective a lot of NA personalities and everything else. In the world race, there is a different interaction, especially with the JP groups, I think, overall. And the mentality go into it. EU's a little, has its own kind of thing going on. A lot of times it's like a lot of people from different cultures and everything all mixing into one group. But, JP has a completely different mentality and NA has a completely different... I'm
so glad you brought this up. Keep going.
No, I was just going to say, the average group on the JP side of World... I don't know if World Racing, but in just groups in general, is that if they're unhappy... they just disband completely. They don't say anything. They just disband and go, and they make a whole nother group because they don't want to deal with the confrontation of telling someone anything bad.
But I can give you an example. I can give you a really specific example before you start.
Sure.
In UCOB, the World First Progression for the first Ultimate that ever released, the team that won said that if at the end of 1 week they hadn't won or they hadn't seen Enraged, they disband.
Just a totally different,
So
different
if
world.
any group had killed it before them, if they hadn't seen Enraged, they would just, that was a call on it. Disband group, never go back in.
So you hit the right word. You said cultural differences. It's literally that. I can't speak too much to the Eastern side, but I know because I don't understand Chinese, Japanese, Korean, any of that, but I've watched a lot of WoW guilds play that are those, and their comms sound totally different. It's very erratic. There's a lot of speaking. And I asked a couple of I raided with we had a Taiwanese player, a Chinese player at one point, or another player is Chinese. We had them learn, or I asked them okay, I hear them all yelling, but I don't get it because of the language barrier, right? What's happening? And they're like, oh, they're just fucking yelling at each other. The whole poll. They're just going at it. He's like, yeah, it's very normal in that culture for that to be the thing. Look at WoW, right? There's 2 very, very well-known guilds, us and Echo, both very good. Echo won the previous race. We won the 2 previous to that. Their mentality is totally different. Our mentality is just constant joking around, having fun. That's our normal. And more importantly, that's not on purpose. That's just who we are. That's the group. That's when we are at our best is when we are doing that. Echo, who's had a ton of success previous to being Echo and currently, they've been neck and neck. We've been going back at it for 3.5 years the whole time, right? They're really, really good, and they're totally different. When they're in their focus mode, when they're having their best pulls, it's when they're super, super focused and serious, right? So it's 2 totally different mentalities with similar success, and that just goes to show it more than anything else is that. You can have different ways of running things as long as it works for you. And I think specifically what I've noticed with a lot of guilds, I've worked with a lot of lower ranked guilds, is that NA is just much different. In EU, it's a NA player watching EU perceives what they're doing as toxic. Some of it is toxic, but they see it and they don't understand that a lot of those cultures are a lot more direct, and it's very normal and in their comfort zone to tell someone something they're doing wrong immediately, and it can sound very aggressive, but it's really just their way of solving a problem. Where if you were to put most North American MMO raiders in that scenario, they would find that insulting. But it's really just being around different cultures more than anything else that a lot of people usually don't understand. Like if you've ever raided, and by the way, surround me with stubborn Germans at every step of the road. I fucking love being around Germans, dude. But like that, like just raid with a very stubborn German person one time, and you'll just get it. And until you don't get it, until you do that, they're just going to come off as abrasive and arrogant. But it's really just how it's just a different culture, man. Like they just want to solve stuff. That's it. They're very direct.
Go ahead.
I've been
Layla.
getting my ass kicked by 2 Germans for like 3 years.
It's pretty insane. Like my perspective on this is when I went to FanFest in EU for the shoutcasting I did over for the PvP stuff, and I was going around in Paris, and the person Ubering, the people I was interacting, everyone, I was like, why is everyone so mean to me? But they weren't. It was just that I didn't understand the interaction very well. And I think that the one thing I really wanted to get onto with like this kind of global sense here is that the big topic a lot of people talk about is the global release overall. And I don't know, because I know it's kind of paced out with WoW, but how does that really work? Like if it's paced out and an NA group clears and then 10 minutes later an EU group clears, one's behind the other, does that get taken into account, or it's just whoever clears it first?
No one knows. That would be a fucking nightmare. The global release is fucking awful. It's like none of us want this, but I think their reasoning for a while has been, why would we change what's been the way for like forever for like 40 people, And there's some truth to that. Like, why would we, even though it's this giant thing in WoW that markets the hell out of their game, they're like, why would we make this change for these few people? But yeah, it sucks. But the reality is that the global release, not having a global release has never mattered yet. It almost mattered. I'll give you an example from this raid. Right? Yeah, it came really fucking close to mattering this raid. But like in the past, it's never mattered. No one has ever won, and it's been like, oh, well, it's because of this. It's literally not happened once. You couldn't even make the argument it has. But it sure fucking could have, and no one knows what we're going to do if that ever happens. Like this happened this last raid for people who are watching this that weren't familiar with the WoW World first race. We had like 2 pulls where we almost killed it. In the first reset, one of them we had someone DC on the 3rd platform, and the other one we had a Moonkin die for 3 minutes, for 2 minutes, and lost a cooldown use. Both of them would have meant the kill. But if we would have killed it that night, where Echo, in my opinion, outplayed us like basically the entire raid, they just outpaced us. They were better than we were. What if we would have killed it that night, and then they woke up 4 hours later and killed it? Right? Like I'm not going to feel confident about that. Like they were just straight up better than we were in the raid, and we got a boss kill before them. Because what really happens is like we get the boss 16 hours early, usually way less than that because of maintenance that other realms don't get. Because obviously NA is the first one that comes out. The maintenance is longer to make sure it works. And then they release it for other regions knowing the problems they solved. So their maintenance takes 20 minutes, right? I don't know anything about server maintenance, but that seems to make sense to me. And then we do some bosses. Every guild, the guild that's in the lead is always having less efficient raids than people behind them, no matter who it is. This raid, it was Echo. They were in the lead pretty quick, so like our raids were more efficient. In the past, their raids were more efficient because they were watching ours. Although both guilds constantly take things they see from the other guild because 2 minds are better than one. People come up with cool stuff. But then what happens is about 3 to 4 days into every raid, there's this holding pattern to where Echo and us usually end up at the same point, and then they go to bed, we go farther than them. They wake up, see what we did when we went to bed. We go to bed, they pass us, and it just happens, and it just happens it's happened every raid. Mm-hmm. So that at that point there is no global there is no advantage, right? Because everyone's just at the same point, and that holding pattern is just basically copying everyone's thing. Now, when that comes into real rocky water is 2 situations. Anything surrounding a reset, or at the very beginning of a raid. So if a raid were to be cleared in like, a day or two or something like that, then that's like a big problem. But after like a few days, it usually averages itself out. And then on resets. So imagine we kill that boss and they kill it a few hours later. Or imagine neither of us kill it in the first week. And then we get our reset, kill it, they get their reset, kill it. What do you do with that, right? No one knows. That's part of the problem. We're very lucky to have that never happened. The guild who has gotten world first in the past like 5 years has always just been the best guild, but there is a weird situation in place where that could absolutely not be the case. So we're all hoping that never happens, right? So
Right.
And there's no easy solution to it either, is there? Every time that I've like
Not on
tuned
their
in to
end,
watch
yeah.
the WoW World First race, it's like there'll be suggestions like, "Oh, why don't you guys just fly over to Germany and race from there?" Without considering all the implications that actually go into that. A lot of people don't consider all of the preparation that happens specific to the way that you are going to be doing progression. And because I can imagine that both you and Echo would have completely different approaches to the way, particularly those first 2 days are going to play out. Hugely
Absolutely.
different preparation
Yep.
cycles.
Yeah, if our raids did not last usually a week, this was a very rare. This was the only raid we got super super fucked by this. This was the only raid that, besides Jaina in the last like 6 or 7 years, that was able to be killed in the first week. The M bosses are usually hard enough to where you do not have enough time to kill them in the first week, and it's less to do with the end boss this time around, that Blizzard majorly missed the tuning on the like 3 previous bosses. Usually those are like 1 day each, or in pull counts like 50 to 100 pulls. They were all like instantly killed. They were just completely mistuned. So that was really more than anything what enabled that boss to die in the first week, was that they just totally missed on other bosses. Same thing with Jaina, Battle of Dazar'alor. They totally missed on all the bosses leading up to it, so Jaina was killed in the first week. We unfortunately always do our splits. We do way less splits, assuming the boss won't be killed week 1, so we get more progression time, ready to kill it with second resets gear. If it's ever killed in the first week, which we basically banked on that not being true, you get super screwed by that. So there's a bunch of like game within the game kind of things, decisions you make during raid. But that also just brings me to splits, because that's something that we have to do that is very annoying. So for people in the Final Fantasy community who don't watch WoW and want to know how this works, you can go back and farm the previous difficulty during the same week. So there's normal, heroic, and mythic. Mythic is like the main progression for World First, but you can go back into heroic and get really good gear during the week. So you have this super anticlimactic, very annoying, boring thing that happens about 2 to 3 days into every raid, where you stop mythic progression and farm this absolute mindless content for almost the entire day, instead of actually doing the progression you want to do just for gear. And that just kind of boils down to the difference between how gear works in Final Fantasy versus WoW, which, by the way, we talked about it earlier. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think the gear differences in the game, there's pros and cons. But one huge con is the 1 day out of mythic progression to farm gear. It's so bad.
So there's one kind of parallel within Final Fantasy, which is every time a new raid tier is released, there's also an extreme trial that comes out. And that extreme trial will have the current best in slot weapon until you get the raid weapon. So it'll be better than the crafted one you get. The problem is you then need to go progress a new fight and then kill it 10 times to get everyone a guaranteed weapon. So you have a decision there to make, whether to step out of the instance, go farm this thing for a weapon, which is going to give you a pretty substantial damage increase, versus more pulls on the boss. So that's like a decision to be made mid-progression, but it's always been a trap.
Yeah.
Always. You don't need it.
Yeah. Now that's the thing in WoW that I think also exists, that we ran into this raid, right? Is there was a situation where the amount of gear you had on the boss majorly impacted your ability to kill it. Like Echo, when they killed it, had 2 more eye levels than we did when we almost killed it, right? Which it's hard to I don't know if eye levels are a thing in Final Fantasy, but that's like a big fucking number. Like that's a lot of damage. So like, I don't know if there's a situation in Final Fantasy where you ever don't have the gear to kill something. Well, we didn't. We had the gear to do it, but you could have potentially not had the gear to kill it.
In modern 14, no. That was only a thing like way, way back in the day that they deviated away from. Almost all, if not all, fights are tuned for. They basically release crafted gear every progression cycle, and the fights are tuned around a World First team having full crafted gear, because they don't want people to feel gear gated in like the race, which I think they have acknowledged. Sfia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they've acknowledged that in previous interviews, that they don't want gear to affect world first raiders. I have a vague.
I can't remember if that was like something. Yeah, I can't remember if that was exact,
right,
but it sounds familiar. Yeah.
Sure, paraphrased and maybe not as maybe implicitly, not nearly as explicit as I'm saying it. But crafted gear is this, and they tune around the crafted gear basically. So it becomes less about is this a pass fail, and more about okay, where is the gear going in our group to make our pulls easier.
So you're gonna love this one. You guys remember because I did do Castle Nathria at Heroic, so I know that the weapon token exists when you beat Heroic Castle Nathria, and that goes to someone and they just trade it in. Every single piece of raid loot is a token for that piece of gear.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
So you're going to be guaranteed 3 accessories from the first fight, 2 of a hat, gloves, boots for the second fight, guaranteed pants from the third fight, and then a hat, gloves, or boots from the third fight. And the fourth fight is a guaranteed chest piece and weapon. And then whoever you give that to can then get that piece of gear. So you can choose exactly where every single piece of guaranteed loot goes in progression.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
WoW players would lose their mind about that because, yeah. Well, we had the ability to give the gear to whoever we want removed from us. It's literally gone in WoW. Like, it exists in personal loot in a way because you can run, if you ever have a high enough eye level, what you can do is run an instance and you can like fill it with people of your armor type. We have no tokens anymore, including the Castle Nathria tokens. Those are not in the game anymore. Where certain different drops happen and you can trade them to people, but only if you have that eye level yet. So when we're doing mythic progression, the items that drop on our hardest bosses cannot be traded and they're randomly looted to people. Which is horrific. I mean, it is so bad. And the reason why that became a thing is because for World First Progression, well, there's 2 reasons. For World First Progression, it was obviously more optimal to always gear DPS because tanks could always live, healers could always heal the fight. Healers were a second priority, but damage is what enabled everything. So you just, you would absolutely never give a piece of gear to a tank or a healer if a DPS needed it. And I think WoW hated that, and I think it makes sense. I think most casual players would hate that, right? Give me my loot kind of shit. So makes sense. So yeah, they developed this super weird personal loot system, and it's really bad. Also, people master looted and like ninja looted runs. They like had like people like loot themselves all the gear, but then they even removed that. They actually had something called guild master loot to where 80% of the group had to be in the same guild to ever even enable it, which removed the ninjaing and pugs kind of thing, which was great. But then they removed that for what we have now, which is it's really bad. It's as bad as it could be. It's really bad.
So the exact problem you were talking. The exact problem that you were talking about with people being like, I want my gear. Why do they get it first? Final Fantasy has a system to prevent that being a problem too, where every time you kill a fight, you get a pity system token, whether you get loot or not, and then you trade in these pity system tokens for guaranteed loot after 4, 6, or 8 weeks.
Oh,
based
okay.
on the piece.
I've heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that's really bad about the current system, besides me just complaining about it, just to give you like something tangible to think about. Let's say you kill the second boss on Mythic, and there's like 10 bosses in a raid. There's probably like 5 trinkets you could get from that raid, which is an item slot. Don't know if you guys have something similar. And on the second boss, you could get a trinket on your Fire Mage that's bad. And it could be best in slot for your Elemental Shaman. And you cannot trade that to him. Like, you loot the item, and it's on your character, and because you don't have something of that eye level already, you cannot trade it. So you are bricking Mythic loot because it happened to be looted to the wrong person. That's just one of the like many examples of how bad it not even is for World First Raiders, but just everyone. It's just a terrible, terrible loot system.
I think I'm good with the way that Final Fantasy XIV does it now. There was a lot of debate, I think, when they started going to the system that people weren't happy with just like giving out those chests and just there's no excitement anymore in it. But I think World Racers, of course, rather be able to.
Do you remember the flip side?
I remember the flip side. I remember the flip side firsthand. Back in Alexander, in the second tier of Alexander Midas Savage, for Final Fantasy players, they'll know what I'm talking about. That was a tier that did not have tokens. We just had raw drops, caster chest piece drops, tank gloves drop, just raw items. We had a situation when we got to the final fight. We kill the third boss. We get to the final fight. Our black mage that tier has received 0 loot, literal 0, gotten nothing, and we had to cater strategies around the fact this black mage has like 1,000 less HP than he should. So he literally can't do some mechanics that he needs to be doing or should be doing because he has no gear. And that was, while you like, I could sit here and I could play devil's advocate for like an hour of like whether that's good or bad. Like, oh, we're making the progression style a little bit more dynamic. Not every group is going to be the same like A to Z pathway. But just the feeling of it, knowing that, oh God, we know what we want to do, but we literally can't just because this guy's number is too small, it's frustrating. So, like, you could sit here and say that it exercises different skill sets and problem solving, but at the end of the day, it's just frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, it was also like, it's not as much anymore, I don't think, but World Race groups would run alts and stuff to try to get the gear and everything. And like they would let it try to drop on certain characters, and if that character guy could loot, then they would start mixing the two groups together, right? The alt group and the main group.
Yeah, that's not a thing anymore now.
That was like way back in the day.
Yeah, because crafted gear is a thing now, and it's tuned around that doesn't need to exist. They specifically moved away from that.
Splits existed back in the day in Final Fantasy before crafted gear and before it was before Alexander Creator, basically. Like Gordius and Midas were very heavily splitted. Like, because Gordius was a 4.5 week tier. What, 4.5? 5.5? 4.5? I think it was 4.5. Gordius was a 4.5 week tier until we killed it, and we did 3 weeks worth of splits because you can kind of identify. Well, we were fortunate enough to where we, by like mid week 1, we saw, oh, we're not killing this fight this week because we added the numbers up, and it's like our numbers do not match this number. We can't kill boss this week. So you spend a decent amount of time going back and like taking a second raid group through, clearing all the fights. Oh, this guy got giga geared. Okay, you're playing that character now next week. And you do that for like 3-4 weeks, and then eventually, I mean, in Gordius's case, like it ended up dying week 4. We can argue whether or not it should have died week 3 for another hour, but it's totally a pointless conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't exist in modern Final Fantasy, I think, just because of the way they tune fights now around crafted gear.
Yeah, and now raids are like the next raid that's going to happen for Savage in Final Fantasy XIV is going to be 1 day. It's a 1 day race.
Savage is 1 or 2 now. Like it's
the first one.
First tier is typically 1.
Yeah, first should be 1. And then
you
Ultimate,
plan with your time off for 2, but
Yeah.
you expect 1.
Yeah. Ultimate, the first one that they came out with was like a 2 week one. It's
11, 12 days, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then since that, Ultimate's more of like a 1 week planning period. We don't know for sure how long it's going to take. So every 3 months, ideally every 3 months, there's some sort of world race. One is going to be a sprint, which takes a day or two. The other one's going to be the kind of marathon that people actually need to sleep and then wake up the next morning to try to clear it. And that kind of gets us into length of time, which is a huge difference between WoW and Final Fantasy XIV right now. And so I am curious about your opinion on that, Max. If you, living in like the long world racing, would you ever want a shorter world racing?
With global release, certainly. No global release, absolutely not. And also it would mean that the fights are too easy. So no. I mean, just absolutely not. No.
Yeah?
It would be objectively bad. Yeah, I mean, like in any scenario, I'm trying to picture any of the raids that they've released in the last couple of years. If they were to be able to be cleared in 1 to 2 days, what would have been different about those bosses? It would have been a completely different game. But if you want to do, but we only get patches every 6 months, usually. So if you're saying 3 months, it would be a mixture between a sprint and a marathon. So you're saying every 3 months they release a one day clear thing, and then every 6 months you still get the like week-long hard progression thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's also changed over time because like the WoW Race World First has gotten so much better. Like the guilds have gotten so much more efficient that like it's hard for them to make content that's challenging and doesn't alienate the rest of the game. Like just even in the last year and a half, how much better our guilds are now, Echo and Limit specifically, than even our exact guilds 2 years ago. They would have smoked them by days, right? So
in what like direction did they push the fight design to challenge that, to make the fights like that, make you excel in that regard?
well, it's really hard. So what their general philosophy has been is like they identify a boss in the raid and they're like, all right, this is tuned for the everyday WoW player. It's usually the first couple in the first week, and then after that, we're just gonna look the Raced World First guilds in the face and be like, these are the bosses you guys get week one. And they don't expect other guilds to even get to them, so they're okay with doing that. And then those fights over time naturally get nerfed by the massive amount of gear you get. So yeah, that's basically how they do it. But it's kind of weird though, because like this last raid, they totally fucking missed. Like there is even a really cool boss. I won't go super in depth with it, but you had a way to like alter the enrage timer by making the fight harder, and you could do all these things, but it was just pure single target. You kill it before it kills you kind of thing. Very high healing requirement, very high damage requirement, supposed to be. And it was supposed to be easy to tune because there was one of these last raids, Sludge Fist, if people know the name, where it had damage amps in it. And it's so hard to tune around damage amps in WoW because certain classes can like exploit a 12-second 200% damage increase than other classes can. But this boss had no damage amps. It was literally just straight across, and they nerfed the creativity of making the fight longer, and they made it a pure 6-minute thing, and it was like able to be killed in 5 pulls, right? And it was really late in the raid. That kind of fight should have been, Sludge Fist was 60. It took almost a day. This should have been that, but it wasn't that. And then there was 2 bosses right after it that were able to be cheesed, and they were also killable in a few hours instead of a whole day each. So they totally missed. So if you correctly take into account that this raid was kind of an anomaly in how poorly they did it, most raids are like that, where you do the meat of it and then you get to like the 3rd to 4th to last boss, and that might take you a day. The 2nd to last boss is usually 2 to 3 days, and then the last boss is like 4 to 5 days alone of figuring that out. But it's also weird. A lot of people don't understand how hard the end bosses are, because normally they're not killable week 1 because of the bosses before them, because of the amount of time it takes. So most of these end bosses, in fact all of them except for Jaina in this one, over the last couple of years, are killed in a shorter amount of time because we get that second reset of gear. So they're not truly given their like full test of how hard they would be by trying to do them week 1, which one of the cool things about this raid is we were actually given enough time to fight Sylvanas week 1, right? And actually had a fully fleshed out, like had to find the damage kind of thing. So,
So what you're saying mostly is that the actual like thing that tests you guys who are now at this, accelerated level of skill across both of your guilds, it sounds like it's just the tuning, which is the main factor, right?
yes.
Yeah. Will you compare that to Final Fantasy? The way that they kind of challenge the world progression teams isn't necessarily the tuning. I mean, the tuning is still a point there, but I don't think it's anywhere near to the level of WoW's tuning. But the design of Final Fantasy fights, that they're conceptually difficult to break down, solve, but mechanically easy to execute. So you'll have just a shit ton of puzzle mechanics, debuff gauntlets, things like that, which coming up with the way to resolve them is actually the most difficult part of the fight in the progression tier. I'm not sure if there's an equivalent in WoW.
And that's why I think Yorl's game can't have testing, because that would fundamentally remove that, right? And our game, like you said, WoW is, like I said, you could have it all laid out for you, and just the ability to do it would be so difficult that it would take you that much time. The mechanical checks are extremely difficult. The personal DPS healing requirements are extremely high, to where it even takes the guilds that have been doing this as a job for multiple years now hundreds of tries to get it right, which is just the fundamental difference in the game. But I actually really like the other one. Like, believe me, dude, if I could, I would be living in a dream world if I could wake up on Tuesday and I'm walking in and learning the name of a boss when I go in, and I know nothing about it. That is what I want more than anything else. That would be so cool. But if that came at a
soon.
What?
You're going too soon.
Oh, well, yeah, I am going to, yeah. But if that came at the expense, and it would, and like basically, I don't know. I'm trying to, I don't know which one I prefer because I've never tried Final Fantasy. But if that at all came at the expense of difficulty, but I mean, well, the difficulty is different because you're figuring it out. But like, I think WoW, I think Final Fantasy fights are designed to be harder to figure out because that's the difficulty, right? So it's like I don't know which one I would want to do, but yeah.
The
They're
learning
not coming
curve
for
is
me, by
usually
the
a
way.
puzzle.
I just live in this city.
No, that's okay. No worries. I didn't call the cops or anything.
Regarding tuning stuff, because this is something that I have a lot of interest in. Max was saying how a lot of times the end bosses get pushed to week 2 just because the previous bosses ended up being, very high pull bosses. Is it fair to say that most end bosses would be killable in WoW week 1 with week 1 gear levels? If it was if say they just release an end boss Tuesday morning and you're just in front of I don't want to say Sylvanas as an example, but any end boss mythic example in previous tiers.
It's really hard. It's a good question. It's really hard to answer because we are trained to never say something is unkillable until we actually do it.
Right.
Because there's been plenty of times in the past where you can get into this mindset. If you ever get into the mindset as we're fighting a boss that cannot die, you play worse because people relax. They don't focus as much because they're feeling like they're doing something that doesn't matter. So because of that, you kind of train yourself to never think that way. Unless you like do math and you're like, oh, there's no fucking way. Like there's just no chance. We'd have to one heal this. If that's possible, it would take us 500 tries to learn how to do it right, kind of thing. But to answer your question specifically, I believe every end boss that we have fought in the last 3 years since we've been going for World First, that would not have been killable in the first lockout would have been Ashara. Ashara would have absolutely would have been too hard to do. And that was also because it had like a major nerf in the second lockout because of the way it was draining energy.
Right.
So that's kind of weird because if you were on that boss earlier in week 1, maybe they make that change earlier.
Maybe they hotfix it sooner and then
correct.
It's just like a totally different timeline.
N'Zoth, the damage check on N'Zoth in week 1 would have been almost impossible, but doable. The most recent one before this, Castle Nathria, Sire Denathrius, would have been killable in week 1, but it would have been hard. Like it would have been really, really, really hard. It was possible though. It would have if we had as much time on Sire Denathrius on week 1 as we did Sylvanas, it would have died, but it would have been really close. It's just that Stone Legion Generals took like 3 days and Kel'Thuzad died in 2 hours. So, yeah.
How do they? I guess I don't even know if you have the answer to this, but I mean, when it comes to tuning, what might go into them missing the mark so much on like I know you were talking about Guardian earlier, and I don't know how Sludgefist tuning was at a world first level, but like how do they miss tuning so much so that you can have earlier bosses harder than later bosses?
I don't know. First of all, Sludgefist was perfect. Sludgefist somehow, Sludgefist gave me so much confidence in their tuning ability because of how hard it was for them to do that. And they just tricked all of us. It must have been an accident because the tuning this tier was really bad. I think more than anything, it comes from this. This patch was super delayed, but at the same time felt very rushed. This patch was really unprepared, not a lot in it, and seemed incomplete. They've made more changes in the first couple weeks of this patches, and specifically to raid content than I can remember. So I think it just comes along the fact that WoW just had a really bad last couple of 6 to 8 months, and I think it affected their raid design team, in which they're normally insanely good. I think is probably the real reason for that. But I mean, there's like no real excuses. It was just really, really bad. I don't know. It's really it's really bad.
I don't want to hijack a Frosty segue or anything, but
Go.
a follow-up question I guess would be, is it maybe resulting from the fact that the amount of prep work that you guys and Echo or Pieces are doing going into each tier, they can't possibly respect that amount of prep work when they're tuning these bosses because of how damaging it would be for the rest of the raiding community? Is that maybe the reason that some issues like this happen. And then I mean, like I think preparation going into these raids is like a whole nother topic we can talk about and segue into. But is it just an issue of they can't possibly balance these fights around the stuff that you guys are doing?
No, because they have. Like literally 6 months ago they did. 8 months ago now. Yeah, I mean, and nothing. Our guilds got better, but not that much better. This had nothing to do with how good the guilds got. That's them fundamentally messing up. That's all.
Yeah, preparation doesn't change math.
Yeah.
It changes what you're capable of, not what they can do with bosses.
Also, another thing that could be attributed to them messing up the tuning this raid was Shards of Domination. So I don't know if you guys actually know what that is, but it was like a random thing implemented in our patch where you looted. So there's 5 items for each armor type that you loot out of the raid. And their sockets, and they're extra sockets that can only be socketed with this gem that drops out of the raid. And you have a chance to get one from each boss. There's 3 bonuses: Blood, Frost, and Unholy. And if you get 3 of them, you get a massive increase. I'm talking like 10% plus increase to your character. They were totally RNG. In the Race to World First went off in the first like 2 to 3 weeks since the patch launched, and that's how many weeks you had to get that on your character. I think Echo had 9 and we had 7. They only had 1 more DPS one than us, or whatever. I don't remember them. They had 2. I don't remember the actual numbers. They just had like 2 more unholy bonuses. Mm-hmm. But it could have been a lot worse. Like in a 1-to-1 guild anecdotal situation, there were guilds with 15 in the week that the boss was killed, and there were some guilds with 2. Right.
Jesus.
So it was just total RNG garbage bullshit. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is they might have tuned expecting people to have more of them or less of them, I guess. Not really knowing how their own system. I mean, it's one of the worst systems they've ever put in the game. I mean, you can probably tell that by the way I'm describing it. But yeah, they maybe that has something to do with it. Because they tried to, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to talk for 10 minutes about how bad the system is in so many different levels. And by the way, this really fucking shitty design they put in didn't even improve the way you played your character. It was just a random % increase. It was like just a completely meaningless system.
Just doesn't affect your rotation at all. Just raw.
Literally nothing. You just RNG get it and you do 5 to 10% more damage. Case closed. That's the system. And not only even if you get the shards, you might not even have the sockets to put them in. So it's bad. It's really bad.
So I wanted to... No, I was just going to bring up, because Layla was talking about this a little bit. I am curious about the preparation, to go on kind of a different note here. Because the preparation for, your team is going to be completely different than Final Fantasy XIV preparation and everything else. I think Final Fantasy XIV is a little bit more loose base with it overall. You guys are an organization, like a company. Versus what we're doing is just like it's almost like groups of friends going in the world race, and that's like the difference between it. So I am curious, and you don't have to give trade secrets. Yeah, you don't have to give trade secrets away or anything, but I am curious about what your preparation does look like for your groups before you go into a tier.
So you do Ptr testing. They do 1 hour tests of every boss on heroic, and then 1 hour tests of every boss on mythic, except for the end boss. So that's like 19 hours over the course of 6 months for just that. However, we have strat beatings before all the mythic ones. Now, just for Final Fantasy players who aren't aware, these are very bare bones versions of the boss. These are not fully, this is not progression time. They're not fully working bosses. In fact, they're usually mostly broken. But it gives you a look into the bosses and what they might do, and gives you an idea of potential like classes you'd bring and stuff like that. And then, yeah, we have, and then the patch comes out, and while we're farming for the weeks up until the raid is released, we usually have like 3 to 4 hour meetings 3 times a week right before heroic week. So probably somewhere around like 50 to 60 hours of preparation before the actual raid comes out. And that's not including all of the time I stay up all night thinking about stuff we could do, just myself personally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically that.
Okay. Sfia, do you want to voice out how you guys prep with your team?
Oh. So because we have no information going in, right? Usually it's a little different from the first tier compared to the second and third, because the first tier has normal mode come out, which is like, it's essentially what heroic is, but probably a little, it's easier than heroic, right? It's like a normal mode compared to mythic. where you can see what the boss is going to do, but it won't have all the effects. It'll have AoE indicators. The pacing will be mega slow. The boss will have no HP. It won't do damage. It'll be missing a whole bunch of mechanics, but you get like an understanding of what'll be there. And then you can kind of extrapolate on that and then just like theory craft some ideas of what they could do with the fight and then go from there.
That's really fun, actually. I didn't know that existed until you just said that, because that I think is a lot of part of the fun. Is if you know they majorly change this fight, you can at least look at it and be like, oh, well, they might do this. Like we went into this tier with Sylvanas, right? Like we knew they were going to do something weird with P2 where the two bridges go out in each direction. But like on heroic, you just do 1-1-1-1-1. We're like, oh, what could they do? Could they do 3 ads? Could they do 4 ads? Stuff like that. So you actually go through that same process, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So that only exists in the first tier of any expansion, because they stagger it out so that people don't feel pressured to rush to level cap and all that stuff and enjoy the story. But every tier after that, or just released on the spot, you get normal mode and savage at the same time. So you are learning everything in normal mode as you go through it the first time, and then you just go straight into savage. So the only experience you have is like one pull of the normal mode.
Just a quick addition to give context to what he's saying. You have to do the normal mode at least once to unlock Savage. So you're forced to at least go through normal. So you will have at least one pull's worth of normal mode knowledge.
Yeah. And usually that'll be like, you'll have a couple of cast bars to tell you what that thing is going to do. Maybe. It'll probably do something different. But other than that, because you don't actually have any information going in, a lot of the preparation is in learning how to like adapt your group to be better to suit virtually every single situation the game can throw at you, because you have to cover every single base in the game. You can't sit there and be like, oh, these fights are going to have X, Y, and Z types of mechanics. We should prepare for this. It's way more broad, far less focused, and makes it really, really difficult to prepare for. A lot of it is sort of self-imposed restrictions on the way that you practice. So it could be things like doing mechanics in very unintended ways and figuring out like just various execution things you can do to really game the bosses into giving yourself a new challenge and just upping your level of performance, that sort of thing. And working on your, I think this is probably the biggest one for a lot of teams, is working on your ability to strategize and conceptualize mechanics and things like that. But that's a much more cognitive thing and not something you just go in and raid and practice, right?
Yeah, that's something where like a lot of our outside the raid prep has been there. Like over the last few years, it's kind of accelerated. It used to be just your 20 people inside the raid. You had someone who was your raid leader inside the raid, and you had your like person who was like updating your add-ons and stuff for your actual accurate timers on the fight outside of raid or inside the raid. And then now that's all been shipped outside of raid, just in the sense of optimization and having and you have people who like make specific weak auras. I don't think there's like a big correlation between add-ons and weak auras to Final Fantasy. I don't think you guys have anything like that. Pretty sure.
You'd be surprised.
Oh, I didn't. No, I mean like, do you guys do what kind of like add-on stuff does your game have? I actually have no clue.
Well, ACT does play. I mean, whether people like to hear it or not, ACT does play a decent role in like progression, like an ultimate where it's lasting.
What is that?
Sorry, it's a third-party program that at its base level is just a damage parser, but you can add plugins to it and stuff, and those plugins can do all sorts of really crazy things, like have things that are similar to weak auras pop up on your screen based on a combat log tick, or you can have it make a sound and stuff. So, but those plugins take time to write, and this is probably what you were alluding to, and the people who are inside the raid, those people aren't going to be the ones spending the time making those weak auras, making those boss timers and stuff. So,
that sounds like a giant unopened thing that could be there.
It's open,
but the design of Final Fantasy fights doesn't necessarily make that as powerful as you might think. So I know that WoW bosses have like spell queuing, right? So if essentially it's like everything has an internal timer, right? And that's going to dictate how the boss acts. Final Fantasy doesn't work in that way. You get to a point in a fight and the boss is going to behave the exact same way the whole way through until that point. And then all you're doing is you're gated by learning that mechanic that you're at, as opposed to dealing with overlaps and figuring out new ways to create a better situation for yourself.
No, absolutely. But I still think if it sounds like that add-on's capabilities are potentially very high, right?
They're extremely high.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm talking about. So like something that for a layman, someone who knows very little about Final Fantasy, you're going to find out more soon. But that sounds like something where if, and it also comes down to traction too, because like the Race to World First in WoW has become this massive event, right? I mean, it's just fucking huge. So with that comes money and investment and sponsorships and all putting all your players in an event that's catered with all this shit, like you have all that. So you have the ability to literally hire people to do this outside, to where like if Final Fantasy ever progressed to that level or even, just got more serious with it, you might see yourself trying to add outside of the raid help to make your guild as good or group as good as it could possibly be. And that absolutely could be hiring some wizard with ACT or whatever the hell it's called to give you something really helpful in progression. Maybe even it's something as simple as like having them write something that tells you what spot to go in. Just even if it's just a reminder, that kind of stuff just helps consistency so much.
I think I need to add this in for sure. Blizzard supports add-ons. Final Fantasy doesn't.
I know that.
Yeah, they are against.
Are you going to get banned for using it?
No.
Then it doesn't matter.
Not unless you really go out of your way to make it a bad thing.
Yeah, sure, but if you're a World First Progression Guild, you don't give a shit about that if you're not getting banned, right?
Well, you're also not getting any support from Square Enix if they see you using it, because it's such a gray area. Like Blizzard, I think will still support people using that on stream and everything else. Square Enix, I don't think they don't. No, they don't want to support that in any way.
Yeah, I get
every
that.
Single
I'm just
World
saying.
First team has maybe not every single one, but it is the common. It's a commonality between all top teams that they ACT is like a mainstay of their performance. It's just how it is.
So,
okay, yeah.
Something to say on top of all of this is that ACT gets broken at the start of every patch.
That is true.
It literally does not function.
Yeah. Like for the first day, you're pretty.
Yeah. If you're doing like a Savage tier, you may not have functionality of this tool before the boss is killed.
What breaks it? Is it because it's not updated with the change to the patch?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could hire someone to have it ready instantly, right?
Yes.
Potentially, yes, you could.
That's what I'm talking about.
I mean, you get that information, I think, maybe a few hours. Like the patch gets released, maybe you download it a few hours, so they would just have to get that information and plug it in and everything else and go.
I don't want to speak to like how fast the workload is of Mr. ACT guy. I don't remember.
I'm telling you, I've seen some people do some wizard shit with weak auras and WoW add-ons where you'd be surprised if there was someone that was good enough with that. I'm like, this is probably just goes in to show you how much we are always tuned to think of how you could do something better or make it more optimized, right? It's we're just programmed to think that way now.
So it somewhat exists a little bit in Final Fantasy, but I don't think it's to the extent that you guys have behind the scenes. But I wrote on the sheet earlier that you guys might have seen, like the 21st man role versus the 9th man role. That we do it like a 9th man is kind of called in Final Fantasy progression. Is very popular. It's very popular for a multitude of reasons. One of the reasons, I don't want to say it's a major reason, but one of the reasons is if you're doing in middle of progression and you just have a great idea for an ACT trigger or something or a plugin, you can just ship that responsibility to that guy. He's bored watching your streams and he's got nothing better to do with his time. He handles that. You keep pulling the boss. Eventually, he has all his work done and stuff. But like it's different between the two games because one game Complexity Limit is an organization. Like you have a team behind the scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the Final Fantasy side of things, it's usually like one or two guys.
Oh, absolutely. Also, I just want to shout out one thing in chat. Someone said very common bad take. And WoW, you cannot raid with add-ons. That's totally fucking made up. If there was no add-ons, no weak auras, no testing, you're talking about these 6 to 10 day race world firsts lasting at most 1 to 2 days more. It's an optimization. It is not a requirement. That's totally fucking made up. But to talk about what you're saying though, I definitely think it's some level of optimization. We've found out our ways. How common was the 9th man before we started doing it? Was it already common. A thing?
It's been a thing. It's been a thing since about 2015, 2014.
So it's
I'd say.
commonplace to have your raid leader or just some one
Oh,
person outside your
one
raid?
person yet. So the major key difference is that like your role specifically with Limit, just for people who don't know, he does a lot of like directing traffic outside the raid. Just watching Discord streams or whatever stream you guys use. But he does a lot of the raid leading and directing of traffic from outside the raid because that takes the responsibility off of the people actually raiding, and it's like a great mixture of two worlds there. What's less common in that's less common in Final Fantasy, where it's more so the 8 people who are in their rating are those are the people directing the traffic. I think maybe, and Sfia can speak to this more. I'll give you my perspective, Sfia, just because I haven't rated World Prog since like 5.0. When I watch you guys operate in TPS, I see someone like Cleese having a much more active role in comms than say you and my teams did when we had like our ninth men back in the day.
Yeah.
A lot of times like we wouldn't have had a Cleese like interact, like we wouldn't have had somebody saying Layla move to B, Layla move to B. Next mechanic coming up is blah 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 blah. That's much more common, I think, nowadays with your guys' team. Is that true?
Yeah, that's essentially just a direct. We saw it working for another team. We're like, okay, just steal that idea, right? But typically,
so that
the
does
ninth
give,
man role,
I guess, credit to what Max was asking, where it is, the role that Max serves with Limit or Scripe or Tags or whoever, like that has become more, I guess, popular in Final Fantasy. I honestly probably since the WoW stuff.
Yeah. So what I understand is that in Verse, Silink actually had 3 people doing essentially what Max does, but what Max does is very, very different to what will happen in Final Fantasy. Directing 20 people and 20 sets of resources and allocations is completely different to 8. Completely different. It's a different game entirely.
And it's also 20 people makes it a lot harder because there's also a lot of things that like classes can do. So like there's just a ton of stuff you can kind of strategize. But like so like my role is like the strategist plus the person who's like shot calling and changing things on the fly in the fight. But another reason why that became a thing in WoW is I actually think having your raid leader in the raid in Final Fantasy, this might be not the case when I see it, actually makes a bit more sense. It was just more that like in WoW, because being in the raid, there are downsides to not being in the raid for sure. Like just quick communication. Like there are so many things where, I mean, when we do testing, for example, I'm always in the raid. I'm in the raid for every test and every raid we do besides Mythic Progression, because it's very important to communicate things as you're learning them by being there. But one of the things that is true about WoW is when I ended up doing it, the main reason I ever ended up doing it was to get myself out of a tank point of view. Raid leading and strategizing from the point of view of a tank, especially with how big some of the bosses are, is it restricts your view of the room. And more importantly, when you're calling out things in WoW, usually what you're doing is you're calling out or it's way easier to raid lead when you're saying things that you're already thinking. When you're having to do something completely different than that, and you're having to raid lead, tanks in WoW do like a different fight than everyone else. It's not the same. So because of that, having to basically lead 18 other people doing something completely different than me is it's weird with your mind. Like it's just harder to do. It'd be so much easier if you're in that role and you're just saying what you're already thinking about doing. So the main reason I ever did it was to get out of the raid, or to just see from a range point of view. And then at that point, it was just another further level of optimization that probably wouldn't have happened in the past. It was more just trying to get better. And it was like, well, if I'm already moving to a range POV, couldn't I just watch this range player's POV and have him fully focus on it? You already said how much their player agency there is in WoW. It's really fucking hard. So why would you have someone in the raid playing at 80% of their capability to fully raid lead, and you just put someone else to put in 100% of their effort into playing their character, and then I can put even more effort into raid leading from outside, right? So like it just became an absolute, it's just really good. Like imagine in league if your coaches didn't just do your draft, but they also just had all of your POVs up on a fucking screen and just told all of your players where to go and what to do. Like it would be totally broken, right? Like it would completely change that. It would remove the need for an IGL. It's basically all of that put into one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I do. I am curious. Go ahead, Sfia. You can go.
I was just saying that concept is like very widely believed in Final Fantasy as well. Like the name of my group is TPS, which is thoughts per second, which is all about not thinking about anything other than exactly what you have to do, right? It's about thinking about nothing other than the exact responsibility. And by removing those sorts of external factors like shot calling, like mechanic callouts, that sort of stuff, it's just another level of that.
Yeah. So I am curious, having the level that WoW is currently with the world race and everything else. And Max, just so you know, my role usually in the world race is tracking it and trying to keep up with everything and trying to make sure there is some sort of structure or foundation towards the race at all publicly, because Square Enix doesn't have a great API that works with websites.
Yeah, we don't have a WoW
else.
progress. We just have this guy.
Yeah.
It's actually very
checking
ridiculous.
Twitter,
at times.
checking, like, going through, talking to Sfia when he's like, he's not streaming, but he'll let me know if he clears something, right? He'll announce it on Twitter, or like just working with people and finding out and actually making that leaderboard and getting the accurate times and making that happen. We don't have any real good programmers who have been able to really accomplish anything like that, and I'm not good enough a programmer myself to do it. But I'm thinking at some point we will get enough interest inside Final Fantasy XIV's world racing that these things start to be produced, like really good programmers coming in and figuring out just ways to scrape websites correctly and doing all this stuff. Seeing the attention that we have it on right now, I want to ask this kind of to Layla and Sfia, seeing everything that's going on in the community. Do you think, can you see Final Fantasy XIV kind of getting to the same level that like Max is dealing with in WoW?
Not the same level, but I don't think it needs to.
Okay.
It's entirely dictated by viewership, right? Because viewership is what brings in money, which brings in more interest, which brings in the ability to do these extra things and raise that level of competition. So if the viewership continues to go up and then money gets injected into the scene, that's when you get that like elevated level of competition. So it's all based on if this like huge buzz that Final Fantasy is currently, in the middle of continues, maybe it'll happen. But if it kind of peters out and dies, then, it's just probably not on the cards.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you would learn everything you would need to learn on the next one. Final Fantasy has never gotten this much attention on Twitch. And the next World First Race, retaining that traction or seeing any kind of an interest in that would tell you everything you would need to know about it as a watchable thing.
Yeah, which is a pain in the ass for me because this is going to be the like most, the biggest world race I think Final Fantasy XIV has ever had. It's going to be a one-day race. I'm pretty sure
there'll be the most eyes on it for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe it's unlucky that it's not an ultimate at this time. But also, I wonder, I actually don't know. I don't know what would be more interesting or more fun to consume, a Savage tier or an Ultimate tier. Because an Ultimate, like, the people love the WoW races because they last a while and there's, like, a lot of stuff going on. But, like, it can also get boring on long days where there's not a lot of progression. Where, like, going through all the bosses in one sprint. There's WoW Esports had something similar to this, where I think one of the biggest problems. Are you guys familiar with the MDI, the Mythic Dungeon International? It's a tournament in WoW where people run dungeons past each other. It kind of sucks. It's like really hard to watch, but like they just recently came out with like something called the Great Push, where they had people basically do it. It was one time a season, and they had all these people playing at the same time, and man, it was so fun to watch because it was all at once. I wonder if a Savage tier in Final Fantasy is actually the bigger draw, even though it's probably less of a challenge than Ultimates are for guilds.
I think they both have a place because we've got a couple experiences with having Savage tier race events this expansion, and they were both fun. They were both fun to consume. We've never had an event for Ultimate yet, just because there hasn't been an Ultimate released since events started being a thing for Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but I think a healthy balance of the two would be my ideal, because they're totally different. They're, like you said, they're totally different. Their methods of consumption consumption are totally different. And what I think would make Ultimate probably enjoyable to watch, rather than the 24 to 36 hour sprint that Savage is if you have a lot of teams participating in an event, swapping around and tracking multiple teams' progress at like different mechanics. Watching, like, you can watch the leaders team progressing through a new mechanic that everyone in the world is seeing for the first time, and then swapping over to somebody in like second or third place, watching them get to the same mechanic. You kind of already know how it's supposed to go as a viewer, but now you're watching them problem solve it in real time, and like that's interesting enough to watch as well. But so it really comes down to like number of teams participating in order to make it interesting. If it's just like one or two top teams, it's going to be a long drag where people are like on minute 12 of the fight, and you've just seen those first 11 minutes like 19,000 times.
Well,
that's
it kind of
rough.
depends. It depends because like, while yes, I think at this point in WoW, people would love like at the end, instead of watching us almost kill it and then Echo almost kill it and stuff like that over and over and over again, would it be more fun if there was like six guilds like that? It'd be a bigger event, but I think it's harder to follow. I think the viewers actually, it's a lot easier to follow a couple of groups. The WoW Race World First was kind of an anomaly in the way that it blew up for multiple reasons. Number one, the two top guilds were actually streaming, and there were two distinct top guilds. And more importantly, one was NA and one was EU. As much as the NA versus EU cringe fest that exists, on Twitch, that really drives viewership because people really, really care about that. Also, interestingly enough, the non-global release has also massively increased viewership because we're not raiding for 16 hours and then going to sleep, both teams. It's 16 hours, and then when we sleep, you can watch them until we wake up, and it becomes this 24-hour event. I mean, that was obviously completely by accident, but that actually ended up improving the reason it blew up was it was just available all day, kind of.
So I do want to give you some more perspective on that, on the events that we've had so far. We worked with Method on one of our events before, and it went okay. It was real quick. It was a 2-day race, and I think it was limited resources, and we just made it work somehow. But then stuff happened with Method and like just the whole thing. So we did our own in-house organization. We got like 40 people together to handle streams and switching, and it was a 24-hour event until the fight was cleared completely. And it worked out really well because we had NA, EU, and JP streams. And so you're switching between all these different perspectives, and you have one or two commentators kind of going over like 3-hour spurts of just kind of going over the fights and explaining everything. And then it works wonderfully for me because I take off 2 days of work. I'm good. I can do it. I can produce this. I can make it all happen and everything else.
Very hard to do over a week.
Yeah, over a week.
These productions, the productions that we put on at Complexity, so not my personal stream, but like the Complexity stream, which still does really well. It's actually cool that there's an opportunity for a newer player to watch a caster break it down for them, and then for a lot of the like people who are super into WoW, they like listen to the guild's comms and they want to know what they're thinking and saying and stuff. But just that Complexity production, that's multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars production.
Jeez, yeah, we don't have that here. It's all volunteers.
And that's just one guild. There's other guilds that is the one weird thing with WoW is that like everyone's trying to do what's best for them. So there's like 5 Race World First events instead of like one third party thing that owns all of it. We did have a third party that was very interested a while ago, and it was a really good one too. But then like one of the guilds involved in the Race World First didn't come to a business deal with them, so they wrote like a twit longer about how they're bad for the community a couple of years ago. So third parties have been generally not interested because of that, which is really great.
Nah. Well, I mean, you still get a lot of more third party like sponsors and everything else than Final Fantasy XIV does at the moment. And I mean, maybe that's going to change. I think that's going to change for the world race. I think that some people are going to come in, like a company or two is going to come in and try to take over and do an event way better than I can do with just throwing together cool people like Layla to come and volunteer and cast for like a handful of hours. So
yeah,
I hope to the bone, Frosty.
Huh?
You're working me to the bone.
Yeah, I'm sorry, dude. I mean, I didn't sleep.
You obviously,
Yeah. But I mean, I do hope that it does kind of grow and progress, and we do see that. I don't think it's ever going to be the level of WoW, just because there's so much money already invested. There's so much like resources, and hey, this is a legitimate thing. Maybe Final Fantasy will get to that, but
in old year, when the Race World first started for WoW, keep in mind it has already a massively higher Twitch community. Only had 10K There was literally 10K viewership for the Race World First when it came out, and it's gone end over end, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger every race, right?
Yeah.
So
we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, our event was like 3K, I think, and then like some other streams get up to like 8K, depending if it's the point of view. Because that's the one thing too. It's like we're taking point of views that are allowed. They're like, hey, you're okay to stream ours on your channel, and that's what we're doing. We're kind of keeping them side to side and everything else, except for Sfia, because he's sneaky and he doesn't want anyone to know his secret strats. But
Here's what I'll say, because it's a topic in chat right now.
sure.
Obviously, external help for these events is always welcome for Final Fantasy, right? I think people should keep the mindset though that it's not a necessity. The thing that I would want is just to make Frosty's life easier. Literally, that is literally all I want to see improved for these progression events. Is just make Frosty's life easier. He does way too much on his own. That is, if I was just to ask for any external help, it's just something that makes his life easier. As far as like the high production teams or just the production level of the event, it's perfectly fine for what people want to do with the events right now. And I think people shouldn't view what we're doing or have done in the past as like being lesser. It's just, are you getting a product that you enjoy, and was the event able to provide that to you at enough of
At scale.
less of a scale, exactly. And I just want people to be a little bit careful when they're asking for these things, because we can exist without them if they're not there. So don't view it as like a failure if it never reaches that point.
Yeah,
True. And something else I wanted to point out on Sfia not streaming progression. So if the world first race was not a big thing on Twitch, there's no fucking shot we would stream. No chance. It's a massive disadvantage to stream your progression. Right. Like, the only reason it's worth it is for dollars.
Yeah,
a lot of dollars, and there's no dollars right now in Final Fantasy. And if that becomes a thing, then you'll see people start to stream progression, and maybe notably in WoW, the current reigning world first guild had to decide to stream for this to ever be a thing, right? Method literally started all of this. It would not be a thing if they didn't do that. It can't be like the second and third guild and fifth or group or whatever the fuck they're called doing it. It's never going to become big. It literally needs the main players, because personalities sell everything, right? Like, you need people to become so much of why people like watching us play is because they think our guild is hilarious. They just watch our guild be absolute idiots while progressing, and they can buy into the personalities, right? So like, the people at the top do need to stream, but while it's really competitive, it's so hard to say, hey, you know what? Even though we're going to have less of a chance at winning, I think this is a more important thing. Honestly, it happened in WoW by accident. Method didn't even know our name when they started streaming Old Year. We decided to go for World First with 2 days preparation, literally before the raid came out. We were like, yeah, fuck it. Let's just do it. Why not? And Method didn't even know. They just knew the competition that they already knew, or that they already had played against. And they knew they were going to beat them anyway. They didn't even know we existed. That's why they did it. And in fact, maybe we beat them and they don't stream, right?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting timeline that we never got to see. What happens if Method lost Old Deer? I don't know.
Exactly. So, it's like I said, the WoW Race to World First is extremely unique and honestly kind of an anomaly. It's hard to recreate that. But if you ever want to go down that road, since Final Fantasy has a lot of very similar things, it kind of has to be an all-in kind of thing for it to become big, but it's impossibly hard to ask the competitors to take a willing disadvantage without knowing if other people are going to do it.
Yeah.
Without the immediate return on that.
That's kind of been the consensus within my team the whole time of, we're not going to stream unless we see the other top team streaming, or unless there's some huge incentive for it. It's just...
I mean, your team doesn't owe anybody anything, first of all. I think there's some like idea out there that like you owe it to people to stream, which is just demonic in nature. Like, you don't owe anybody anything. Your prog is your prog.
I will say though that I personally want to do it simply because there's never been a world first on stream in Final Fantasy.
It's been a world.
It's one of the last things that hasn't been done.
It's the final frontier, yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
And you guys talk about like the Final Fantasy community. As much as the WoW community was fine, the Race to World First actually massively boosted WoW's overall Twitch popularity. Like if you take out the anomaly being Asmongold, which your game is now familiar with as well, there's probably very few streamers that are that big just within their game at all, right? I mean, he's just one of the biggest streamers on Twitch in general. But like very rarely, when you look at game sections, it's like usually like there's a top streamer and it kind of filters down. In WoW, I guess now Final Fantasy, it's like Asmongold and then fucking craters. Like I'm like one of the biggest WoW streamers. I don't know exactly where I stand in there, but like it's probably like 2 or 3 of people who like consistently play WoW, and I get like 4 to like 6 or 7K viewers a day outside of Race to World First, and that's fucking miles below Asmongold, right? So like, yeah, that's but it can't grow to that point. That like if you don't consider Asmongold, the overall viewership consistently within WoW has been raised by the Race to World First. So if you feel like in Final Fantasy that the Race to World First is this very cool thing that people can buy into if they're given the chance, that's the only way you're ever going to get there.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Well,
because
the thing
it
is,
really matters.
You're right about everyone having to buy in, because even the world first group, if they stream, they might not be the world first group because they streamed, right? It has to be all these other groups that might possibly get it. And I think that it's so easy to create a group of 8 really good players that it's just a huge gamble. It's a really huge gamble to do it. And I think at the moment people are kind of okay with it because they want information, and the only way to get information is to get the one person who's stupid enough to try to like gather it all and put it in one spot. And then they'll watch it just to see the next graphical mechanic that's coming up. They're trying to see whatever they publicly can find available, and if they have that spot where they can have the spotlight in one spot, then they're okay if they don't see the very first clear, because they'll see the third clear that's on stream, and that's still just exciting, I think, to them. Maybe not completely as exciting, but close to it, because everybody's kind of experiencing that same, hey, this is the first time I've ever seen it together. Because Sfia, when you clear, you don't release your footage immediately. Like, you're not just like, boom, here's our clear. You wait until some teams have cleared it, or until someone else releases it. But
yeah, it's always like once you clear, it's protect the integrity of the race for other people first, and then once it's been made public either by someone else or you've reached some sort of agreement.
Somebody
with other
streams
groups,
in Rage or something like, okay,
yeah.
well, you guys have seen all the cool blind mechanics. All right, now watch how we did it.
Yeah.
I think what we did in Ultimate was actually pretty cool. The streaming teams were so far behind that as the streaming teams got to every mechanic, we released footage of our first time seeing those mechanics.
I remember you guys doing that, yeah. That was cool.
I remember that very clearly because you guys sent me the full clear while everyone else was still trying to clear it. And I was still casting on that, or still talking about it, or not casting, but talking about it with other people. I'm like, I immediately couldn't say anything anymore, because anything I said might be related to giving a hint about that mechanic. And so I felt kind of bad about
I also
that.
think, regarding the stream side of things, I think that Final Fantasy definitely has a market for it just because of the design nature of the fights, and that they're made to be spectacles, both visually and like musically as well. Like a lot of the fight design in Final Fantasy is like, this fight is going to be really fucking cool exactly once.
And also, I think why Final Fantasy and WoW being such different games is really, really hard for Final Fantasy to be streamed is that, again, the difficulty in WoW is so much on the personal player's ability, their skill in the game, the world first race. Figuring it out and strategizing is certainly part of it, but like player skill and like the actual execution requirements of the fight are so high that streaming it is okay, because someone can copy your strat, but they still need to do it so much more before they can do it. In Final Fantasy, there's probably some fights where like people could just copy paste your movement and stuff, and they're like massively, it's so much more of a disadvantage in Final Fantasy than it ever is in WoW, because just so much of WoW is your ability to actually be able to do it at all.
It's pretty accurate.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues is going to sleep on Savage on the first day and making that decision. Hey, do I go to sleep, or does the JP team that woke up later, or the EU team that woke up later, see our VOD and beat it while we're sleeping? You have to find that fine line of when you start losing that ability to, and Sfia could talk about this forever, losing that ability to actually progress because you're sleep deprived. But
not me. I think Max has a much more raw a take on this one.
Yeah.
Of just being, well, it's weird. It's like you we're put in these facilities now that are like, it's all about your health. Like during breaks, you can like get these, I forget what they're called, but like you can like put your legs in them and it like helps blood flow and stuff like that. And then they like, it's like compression. And then there's just like the best food you could ever eat. And it's literally designed to make this as good for you as possible. And it doesn't matter, man. When you exhaust your brain like that for 15 hours a day and you go back and even sleep a full 9 hours, you are just, you're mentally exhausted for a week and a half, and it's not something sleep can fix. In fact, a lot of us famously will sleep so long for like 3 to 4 days after that before you even start feeling normal again. It has nothing to do with your nutrition or the amount that you've slept. It's just your brain has just been worked to its absolute extent. Right. And I wonder, I think some Final Fantasy, how long do you guys raid when you raid Ultimates over a week?
It's
first day
usually momentum
yeah,
based. Yeah, it's a momentum based thing, right? It's like the first day you want to get a good lead ahead. Sometimes you push 20 hours, right? But doing so is usually a mistake.
20 hours?
20 is pretty common to do on the first day.
Oh, never mind.
After
this is Savages. We're like
yes.
Or first day of Ultimate as well.
For
first day of Ultimate is people pretty typically do 20.
So like I don't know if this is like a good thing or not. I'm pretty sure we've decided it was, but I remember back in UCOB a while ago, we did 24 hours day one, Sfia, right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
Really
but you prep for that, right? I remember the whole week leading up to it, we would basically have team meetings at we
did the same thing,
like 3 a.m. to get everybody's sleep schedule. So like we'd clock in at 3 a.m. for the 7 days leading up, and then like every 2 hours I would play fucking annoying nanny, like, hey, you guys still awake? And making sure you didn't go back to sleep. And we would do that for a full like 20 plus hours just to get everybody comfortable with their bodies being awake for that long.
That's so different. I'm so glad I asked that question. If we knew we were going to raid for a week, staying up for 20 hours on a day, unless it's the last day you're trying to kill it, is basically throwing the whole race. We would lose. Like you don't catch up on that sleep, and every single pull you do in the next couple days after that is going to be so inefficient due to people being tired that it would never be worth the extra hours. Like we've tried it as well. We've done it. At least and keep in mind, it's weird for you guys because like you guys are trained to go super, super long because Savage tiers could be cleared before you sleep. Correct?
Yeah, you have to operate on sleep if sleep lose.
That exactly. So that never exists in WoW. It has once, but it was a total anomaly in Emerald Nightmare. But like in WoW, it's a marathon and not a sprint, and the sleep you get every day is so fucking important. But with Final Fantasy, you don't know exactly how long it's going to take to kill the boss. So like you're afraid to get that early sleep in a way, where in WoW it's an almost guarantee that you'll wake up and you'll be fine, if that makes sense.
No.
It varies a lot. Like day ones can go anywhere from like 16 to 20. It's like I said before, it's like a momentum thing. If you're feeling good, if you're feeling like you're not dragging at 16 hours, you push those extra few. Because the performance level required isn't the thing, right? It's not how well you're pushing your buttons, it's how well you're thinking about things, how well you can problem solve these mechanics. And if you're doing that and still making progress, it's not a bad thing, right? But you will have obviously some blowback the next day. But again, like 16 hours is usually the typical that we do. I think in Promise, which was the most recent, the most recent one, we did 20 hours, sleep 8, then killed it the next day.
Okay,
I'm surprised you slept 8.
I was about to say, so sleeping 8. So that's maybe why I'm so opposed to it. So when our reset comes up in WoW, we play for 12 hours, or we play for like the full 16 hours. If we were to go 20, for us, we would have to still wake up at that time, because you don't want to like, for example, let's say we play for 20, then sleep for 8. Our wake up time is now naturally 4 hours after the reset. So if it rolls to a second week, which it does 90+% of the time, we're fucked, right? Like you're going to wake up with lower sleep because you're not going to be able to adjust that sleep schedule backwards. So that's where I think it's been kind of a weird thing. Deal. And there's also production. So we like wake up and our production starts kind of thing. There's like, that's
right.
Weird,
There's external issues there. Yeah, I don't think there's much necessity in Final Fantasy to go past the 16 to 18 hour mark. I think the UCOB Extreme was like, I think it only existed because UCOB, which I keep calling it UCOB, sorry, it's the Unending Coil of Bahamut. It's the first ultimate that they released back in 2017. It's an anomaly in itself because being the first ultimate, nobody had any idea what that meant. All we had knowledge of prior to that was the tier before that got cleared in like 25 hours or something. So it's like, oh, if we need to play for a 24-hour tier here because they seem to have just forgotten how to make hard fights. And then they threw a curveball, and UCOB took what, like 9 to 10 days or something, for reasons that we don't need to get into.
I mean, it's just one fight. Yeah.
that's
It's
one
like
fight.
it's kind of like 3 fights in one, but
it is. It's, yeah.
You
It's a
start
long
again
fight.
at the start.
It was a 19-minute fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think what Max is saying is perfectly fair. Like, there's not much reason to go beyond that 16-hour mark, especially for them when they have to get up on a schedule and maintain that schedule for a possible week 2 reset. And they have
even
production
the
behind them.
16-hour mark, no guild on Earth is having 16 hours of efficient pulls. It doesn't exist. You probably have, and this may differ on the game, right? Because like,
It doesn't.
for example,
It's-
I have no idea whether this is true or not. It's possible Final Fantasy or WoW, either one of them just requires a lot more of your player's mental within a certain fight to where over a long day it could stress you out more. Haven't played Final Fantasy, no fucking clue. But like, it's possible that like different games have different.
I think I can comment on this actually. I think the second to second gameplay of WoW pushing buttons is much more active
I think
cognitively.
it tires you out probably more.
Okay. Well, sure. Okay, so for me, what I found in my game is that the reason why you usually take long breaks to figure stuff out and you don't just chain pull all day, and the reason you take long lunch breaks and dinner breaks is because you have nowhere near the 16 hours you're awake of pulling the boss and expecting people to actually play at a high level. It's much, much lower than that because of what's required from you. So usually you just take longer breaks, longer dinner, and you expect that there's going to be some times in the day where it's up and down.
So I do want to ask this real quick. And I know we're over, so you might have something else planned, Max. And I'm sorry I'm taking up extra time from you.
I yellow everything, man. Totally fine.
Okay. I do want to ask. So when you get to the end, where you're like, hey, we can clear this if we put in the extra few hours or something like that. Do you push the extra few hours, or do you hard cut, say, hey, we've done our brain limit and we can't do any more?
Sorry. Well. Sorry, say that again.
Sorry.
I think
So
I missed...
have you, like, when you go to the limit, like, you're exhausted, you can't think anymore and anything else. When you're in the final days of that, when you're close to a kill, do you start to change that rule where you're not taking as long breaks, you're not like
So it has to be a very binary. It has to be we have to kill this boss tonight or we lose, to where you'd ever consider staying up really long. Like, for example, the night we stayed up the last day when we were trying to kill it, we had to do that because we knew we were going to lose if we didn't. Then it became a certain point where, or most likely, you never know. And there was a point where we went to bed and we knew for a fact that we were never going to be able to kill the boss that night because people were exhausted. So you just have to go to bed, plan to wake up early. Maybe it takes them a little longer to kill it. You have a shot, something like that. But yeah, generally speaking, you never push after raid time because it fucks up your schedule. People play a lot more consistently when they have good rest, and that's so important. And there's basically nothing that would make you push over hours and raid more than like 15 to 16 hours a day. It's more 15 now, not even 16. And because of that, you know, it's a very binary. It's like we have to kill this boss or it's over. It's the only time you'd ever push.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. I mean, we do the same thing in Final Fantasy XIV. I think, Sfia, it's the same deal. But no,
we got bitten by it real bad in the second tier, this expansion. We thought it was dying day one, and it didn't, and we lost because of it, essentially.
How many hours did you do day one? I remember it was like 23, right?
24.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's tough. It's a bit of a gamble in the sprints, right? Because you just don't know until you actually get walled, and then like I know we used to talk about this all the time. It's like you can ride on like a high of adrenaline unless you stop seeing new mechanics. If you reach a point where you're just not seeing new mechanics, you're just going to start to fade out, and you're going to lose that high, and that's like the worst part. But Sfia, regarding T, because I know my experience with UCOB and Uwu, the two ultimates before T, but I didn't obviously participate in T Prog. I was already out the door by then. What was your guys' schedule like for T? Because for people who don't know, like Sfia's team's progression in T was very productive. It was like super good. I have nothing but props for how they handled T. People have said multiple times it's like one of the best progression performances the game's seen. And that's true. I've been around Prague in this game since 2013, and the performance they had in T was great. I would like to know, like, how did you guys manage the schedule regarding seeing the new phases in T, and when you finally did see Enrage, what was the schedule?
We did pretty consistently 16 hours, day 1, 2, 3. Woke up day 4, and then knew it died that day, so we just pulled until it died, which happened on about hour 18, 19, maybe 20.
So you were bleeding out there in the end, probably. Like there was probably thoughts in your mind like, we might have to sleep.
Yeah, the kill pool at the start,
and it was probably starting to stress you out because you're like, did we overstep? Did we overextend here? So
it wasn't a we've played really well type of situation because nobody else is streaming, right? We don't know where they are, so we're like, oh shit! Always at the back of your mind, they're right behind us.
Did we screw this up? Did we go too far? Yeah, I feel you.
So that last day was like, we knew it could happen, and in the kill pool, the comms are like, oh yeah, I felt like every pull has been the pull for the last 4 hours, sort of thing. And it was, but it was just at that point, and we luckily got it. But it didn't matter when we killed it because we turned out we had like 4 days of leeway.
Yeah, but you didn't know that.
But we felt like people were right behind us.
Yeah, and it was just all from one mechanic that people were trying to figure out, and they couldn't piece it together, and you guys just figured it out.
It wasn't that the community took 2 hours longer on that one mechanic than we did. We did the math. Yeah.
Okay.
So it wasn't that.
I do, while we have this kind of crossing of worlds here, before we finish up and everything, I want to actually kind of give the floor a little bit to Max. I don't know if you have any kind of questions for these two guys who have lots of experience with world races in Final Fantasy XIV. Anything like from your experience that you would want to ask and get some more information on. I know we did a lot of that so far, but if there's anything before we end the show that you had, I'd want you to get it out there.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of the questions that I would ask, I'm going to answer myself in like the next couple weeks, I think, right? Because I'm going to actually do the content blind with a couple of players, so that should answer a lot. But I mean, I don't know. It's just more about like. So something he mentioned that's really interesting, just about what he just said. The decision to push really late to kill a boss, knowing or thinking that it dies, it's really stressful because every moment you don't kill it, and if you feel like if you go to sleep, then all that time was a huge waste. You would have rather have gone to bed earlier and gotten rest and then went up fresh. So I've always found that interesting. That decision is very stressful, and not a lot of people actually go through it. The ability or the decision to push the boss late into the night and not go to bed is like the whole time it's just so stressful because then people in the back of their minds are like, what if we don't kill it? What if we wake up? Going to bed, especially in a no stream scenario, is a very terrifying thing because you're always afraid of waking up and someone having killed it.
Yeah. Wake up every 3 hours, check your phone. Oh god, go back to sleep.
So one other thing I wanted to ask was, what does your all's break schedule look like during a typical progression day? Let's say Savage.
You're gonna hate this. You're gonna hate this.
I won't. Even if you don't have breaks, I won't hate that. I don't really care. I just want to. Yeah. What is the
break schedules? Are someone says I got to use the bathroom, everyone goes and heats up food, and then you eat at your desk and keep playing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, if I was raiding in a situation where raid content could be cleared in one day, you would do the same thing. You would never take a hour-long dinner break and a 30-minute lunch break because you're just wasting time. But it's just we only do that because we know it takes a long time. So it's just always about keeping your mind as strict as possible. Yeah, that's a straight up no breaks thing. It's a
little different in Ultimate. You'll be like, oh, we'll take 15 sort of thing.
Does anyone ever DC? Do you guys ever like have people DC?
Yeah, they have.
Like, well, I mean, like, here's why. Because like,
kill. I'm trying to remember.
I'm trying to I'm trying to wonder if like you guys only have 8 people. So like, if you don't have a 9th person, like, what the fuck happens if like someone's power goes out?
It's bad. I think a lot of the top teams have like a roster of like 9 or 10 So you could make it work. It's not satisfactory. It's not ideal. I shouldn't say not satisfactory. It's not ideal. Having somebody sub in for a little bit, just because Final Fantasy is so puzzle based, and like you want your character to move a certain dance, you bring in somebody new, like they're relearning dance moves. It's not just like do damn to boss, we phase boss. So bringing somebody in is never ideal, but like, has it ever been so bad? I can only speak to like our teams. I don't think it's ever been so bad that we needed to bring somebody in. The only exception I think would be like the Uwu situation, right?
Oh right, yeah.
We
I'd say
literally
that-
lost one of our main tanks the day before Prague for a week, so that was kind of a problem. But yeah, no, I think we've just kind of been lucky, and it just hasn't happened yet.
Am I imagining this? Sfia, wasn't Kyo like having issues with DCing and stuff, or there was someone in your group?
I mean, I think Brian was having DC issues, but like, it wasn't like it was taking him out of the game. He was just laggy as shit, and you just got to deal with it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Another question, how important, specifically for Sfia, is player skill and acquiring people of the same player skill with better player skill as opposed to keeping a team together for cohesiveness? So like, for example, in WoW, I have to, like, when I recruit people, the only people that we can recruit that are like ready to play at this level, it's not like there's a lot of people you can recruit. Your recruiting pool is actually very small of players that are good enough. You're usually looking to recruit the literal best player in like one of the guilds barely behind you, like top 5 or top 10 world. Like that's your recruiting pool basically. Because there's just such a learning curve at the top, and there's such a steep fall off in player skill. Is there something similar to that in Final Fantasy? And how often do you make roster swaps? Do people have their spots on the roster until they quit, or do you actively try to find more talent?
There's no team I've ever been in that's had any sort form of success has had like the super cutthroat mentality. That said, the people that I've always played with, I think I'm fortunate enough where they're the type of people who are always be self-improving and never, complacent. I don't think, because of just the skill expression between the games, I think WoW has a much higher skill cap of pushing buttons. So that just plays a smaller factor in Final Fantasy. You reach that ceiling so much faster, and then it's all about the soft skills, and those are things that are less to do with, like I was talking about at the start of the show, those metrics and those sorts of things. And the things that you'd be grabbing those people for are things that you can't know until you've played with them already. That said, when people do leave or you do need to replace people for whatever reason, the process is usually, it's all word of mouth stuff, right? Like you know, these are all known entities. And if it's not, it's going to be someone who you are taking a gamble on, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because I always think that kind of stuff is so interesting, especially with a smaller group. It's much more tight knit. So it's the process of replacing people. Like, I just wonder what it would be like if you like did an ultimate boss and you're like, man, this group was great, but like this guy just really held us back. If that ever happens where it's like this one guy just made one girl just made so many mistakes. Like we have to at least consider it. But then also, like, do you commit to trying to make that player be better? Because me as a raid leader, the way that I'm trained to think is I think repeat mistakes are my fault. Like if someone is making repeat mistakes in WoW, I put that on me I need to be doing a better job of helping them do what they need to do in some cases, right? So I just wonder how much of that thinking exists in Final Fantasy. But it sounds like you answered it.
Incredibly relatable. Anytime, like, there's always going to be mechanics that specific people just don't get. One person will be terrible at this mechanic in this fight. One person will just like not understand conceptually this mechanic in this fight, and it's on everyone around them to enable them and battle through that stuff. So in those situations, you're never going to find a person who's perfect at every single thing in the game, right? The person who does
Not a
optimal
single
damage
person,
and is absolutely flawless at every single thing that exists in the game.
Yeah.
But what you can do is cover other people's weaknesses and help people understand their shortcomings so that they can improve them. And
the best groups really do. They cover each other's weaknesses.
Yeah, it also just comes down to like the general mentality in the group, right? Because like I think you as a problem solver, if you view people around you just as equals, that you're all trying to solve a problem, it comes to it's very easy to have a good morale and to not really get upset with people, where I feel like there's a lot of lesser experienced groups that view the person messing up as an obstacle in their path rather than a person they need to, solve a problem with. And because of that, that's usually what leads to like, you know, toxic mentalities and stuff like that. And people wanting to leave and having to recruit new players is looking at things like that. All right, but that makes sense though. The whole thing makes sense. All right, another question, since I can ask questions to you guys.
As many as you want.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the deal. So like, I don't give a shit about story in video games. I know you Final Fantasy players are gonna get real mad about that. It's just not my thing. Sorry. Love in-game stuff. I find the creative decision making you play in the top level in PvE MMOs is very fun. So here's the deal. I and most of my friends boost in this game, or else we would quit. That's the reality. So how, as a streamer in Final Fantasy, do you get people to just fucking get over it that you boosted? And if not just you boosted, but you just will never care about the story in the game, regardless of it being obviously very, very good. How do you like get them to like shut the fuck up?
Sfia and Layla, you guys know this better than
I
me.
mean, Sfia streams a lot more than I do, but my expectation would be they're just going to complain until you're actually in the raid, because the content that they're going to be fed when you're in the raid will distract them so much from the fact that they'll forget that you boosted and they'll stop caring, because there's no way to make them stop caring.
Yeah.
Just put emote mode. The emote mode. That's actually the answer.
Yeah.
It sucks.
All
It
right.
really sucks. But go ahead, Sfia.
It's really weird because I didn't boost, but I skipped everything in the game. I skipped all cutscenes, all dialogue for like 5 years. And I've only actually gone back and watched all the cutscenes in the last couple of years sort of thing and actually paid attention to the story. And whenever a new patch comes out, I skip through it all and then go watch it again after the fact. So boosting is the same fucking thing as what I did. So I literally just cannot understand what the people who are upset about that
Well, yeah,
actually have to be upset
we
about.
talked about it before. It's because we talked about it in the call before we started the thing.
Yeah.
It's because people get super into it. It's what drew them into Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy games, not even the MMO, are known for having very good story, right? So like it's usually the main draw, and people love it, and they want you to experience what they experienced. That's what it is. They want you to find that same love that they did. You know, it's like when you're trying to recommend a show to someone, you're like, dude, you got to watch this episode. It's the same thing, right? Like you want them to see that thing that drew you into it. So I totally get it. It's just that like I don't fucking care at all, and I never will. And it's just like pushing your. It's like making people want to enjoy the same things you enjoy. It's weird because in Twitch it just comes across as like a massive pack of people that think that way, when it's like it kind of makes sense that like people think that way. But yeah,
It's most likely also a vocal minority. Twitch gives a platform to a lot of vocal minorities, obviously. I think the important thing for people to remember is this is like not just from external parties coming into their game skipping story. Like progression raiders since the dawn of time in Final Fantasy XIV have literally been hitting escape on cutscenes to get to raid content since like Binding Coil, and this is somehow like now taboo. Like it is so the norm for raiders to skip through the content quickly and go back and redo it on an alt, which is what a lot of the WoW players are wanting to do anyway. Like it's just wild.
I skipped the kill cutscene on our World First T video, and like 90% of the comments in the YouTube are just, bro, you skipped the cutscene. Are you serious? Yeah.
I think a lot of people are watching some of the
It's
streamers
conditioned.
come in and experience the story, and they're like, "Oh, I love this! I love seeing them react to it. I love seeing them." Then they go up to this other stream that's popular too, and they're just skipping through it, and they're like, "Fuck you! You're not doing what I want you to do. I'm not happy with you." And that's
well, people are protective of their games. It's like why tribalism in video games exists in the first place, right? It's like in the very extreme versions of that are like wanting other games to fail to in some way validify your choice of game. Like that's the like super psycho shit, but like that we've actually seen a lot recently with like the Final Fantasy and WoW communities merging. But they're like, you know, people just want you to feel the same love of the game they did. And if you're ever skipping through that, it just terrifies them because right now, especially Final Fantasy viewers and players are probably loving the increased. Final Fantasy has had a lot of players for a while, but now it's got a huge surge of players and huge surge of popularity. And they want to keep that. They want to keep the momentum. They're in a lot of ways probably scared of losing it. So they're trying to just make sure that everyone who comes into the game has like the most, like the highest chance of appreciating it. But what they don't get is especially people coming from other MMOs that has a lot of people that would like your game potentially, but for a totally different reason. And that's what they don't get. But I think they'll get it over time.
Yeah.
It's just, I'll probably just have to ban a lot of people, but that's fine.
Yeah. I'll let you know. So this show does like every topic in Final Fantasy XIV as possible, and we'll do lore shows. The most toxic comments I ever get are on lore shows. Not anything else. I just have people shitting on me for not understanding the lore.
That's kind of interesting.
It's
funny.
Bad. They will say, why is Frosty even here? He needs to just not talk the entire fucking show and let these other people talk, because if I say something, it makes them upset because I told them their favorite character sucks or something of that nature. It's just, it's bad. But
perfect example. Someone in chat, at Low Maximum, you will never get the most out of it if you don't understand the story. Imagine killing Sylvanas without knowing who it was. I have no idea what Sylvanas has done. No clue. I never know. I know she snapped a hat at the beginning of the expansion that made the Shadowlands happen. And I know she saved some people from a tree or some shit. I know literally nothing about her, and I never will. That's my point. There was a tree
involved.
That is my point. I don't care about that even in WoW. That's not why I and a bunch of people play games. It's totally fine for people to play games different than you, and that's cool. All good. No reason to get emotional about it.
Yeah. All right. So while we have I feel like it might be fair for Layla and Sfia to kind of ask some questions to Max here that maybe we didn't talk about before we end up. And I don't want to like burn everybody's time too much here, but if you guys had like something you wanted to say before we wrap up the show or ask.
I mean, I'll just ask like a really blanket question, and this is like, I'm not looking for even fishing for an answer here. You can answer as honestly or candidly. For your guys' little project that you guys are doing in Final Fantasy, what are, I guess, the expectations going into it that you'd want to outline for people who are like tuning in and watching? Is there an end goal in mind, or is this just see what happens?
Absolutely see what happens. I don't even know exactly how I want to do the ultimates yet, because I want to reassess that after I do the Savages, because I know the ultimates have a lot of things where like things from that raid tier can be like a hint on how you do some stuff, and like there's things you just need to have in-depth knowledge about Final Fantasy where like I'm just trying to think of an equivalent in WoW where it's like, wait, dude, they don't know that you're supposed to use like a Warlock Gateway here. That makes it so much easier. Like, that's so good. But like, here I am. If there's an equivalent of Warlock Gateway in Final Fantasy, I have no fucking clue what that is or what it's called or how you use it or anything. I know nothing, right? So the fun is going to be taking a group of people to see these fights blind, and I think it's going to get a lot easier as we go, because I think at the beginning we're just going to have just no fucking clue what's going on. We don't know where to look for debuffs. Like, I still don't know what Limit Break does. Don't tell me. And then like and
I
like
thought that was the name of the group of you guys.
Yeah, it is a small
Limit.
shout out to our group. I'm glad they named it that. But yeah, it is yeah, I know it's named after us for sure, but I don't know like what it does. But then yeah, I don't know. Like it'll be fun. The goal is to have fun and see it. I don't have a lot of competitive now. If I could have gotten like a full roster of like Limit and Echo players, and we wanted to like actually try harder and figure it out and like try to like speed clear an ultimate after we learn the game, that would have been different. That's not what this is. There's like I think 3 of the 8 players have world first experience, or have achieved a world first, maybe 4. And then there's 2 people that play it kind of casually. One of them's a content creator from another game I've never played with. Like it's just a group to go through and have fun, and figure out the content. Because what I love more than anything else is figuring out and creatively problem solving raid encounters in any game. I don't know much about this game right now, but that is what I hope to achieve. And I think I found a group of people that'll make that pretty fun for me. I've raided with a few of them before, so.
Cool. Well, I know that I speak for a lot of people when I say people are looking forward to it, just because you have a very interesting vantage point. For multiple reasons, but specifically highlighting what you said, there are a lot of fights that people pull ideas from in previous years for problem solving modern fights. But without you guys having any of that, for like the vets here, it'll be really interesting to watch to see like, okay, what does this fight actually look like if you didn't know about that previous fight?
Correct.
So
exactly. Cool. And also that same thing could happen in WoW, where like you see a mechanic in WoW for the first time and you're like, oh, that's like Armageddon from Kill Jaden. You know, you're like, oh, I remember that. Remember how, and you don't even think about it, but you just naturally do it the way that you did a mechanic similar years prior. There's going to be none of that, right? So yeah, that'll be interesting, which is why I thought it might also be better to start from the early game savages and go up instead of doing Shadowbringers and then backwards. But the problem with that is that the early stuff is like really outdated and it's weird scaling wise because like of a bunch of different reasons. So like,
Yeah.
I'll let you guys. I mean, so what a lot of people in chat don't know is that we have like a Discord setup, and both of them, Sfia and Layla, are actually in it, and they've given us like a lot of guidance on like setting up our characters and stuff because obviously we're fucking lost. But I would just leave it up to them. Whatever they think would be the best experience for doing it is fine for me. I really have nothing in mind. Like I said earlier, I fucking YOLO everything. We just figured out what days we're probably going to be raiding today. So like, yeah, we'll just kind of go with the flow. It'll be kind of fun.
Cool.
All right, sick.
Sfia, do you have any questions or anything you want to ask?
I do, and this is a big tangent here. All right, I kind of want to know, and this is pretty specific, how this, like, you said that you have, you know, beyond the 21st man and beyond the people who you're subbing and on your like expanded roster. How do the people like the strategists and the weak auras people, how does that functionally interact with the team on an in-progression setting?
Are you considering myself as one of those two, or are you talking about the people outside of me? So how do we function with well, I mean, I do like, it's hard, like I do everything. Like basically like every decision we make ever goes through me. But like the people outside the raid, it's just like we have like a weak aura person, and if you type in a channel what weak aura you want, it'll get made. A lot of them are made before the raid, but like some of them in real time are made. So you just reach out to that person or someone who we have as an analyst to find the best pot cooldown or the best pot timing on the current fight you're doing or something like that. You can reach out to that person to find out something. Oh, well, you should actually be using your CDs exactly here, here, and here to get an extra use, or give you something useful like that. I'm a little bit different because I am just constantly in all of it. But then there's people outside that work alongside me that are there to think differently. Like, for example, if I'm someone who is trying to fix every small problem in our raid to make our current pull better, it's really hard to have that mentality and philosophy and also be the same person that's thinking about breaking down and destroying your strat and coming up with something entirely new and better, right? Having both of those mentalities or thought processes at the same time is almost impossible. So having other people around to think of only things like that, but like how, I don't know if I quite understand the question, like how to interact. Can you like?
I'm talking more of the direct like to and from the like, more like you're talking about the strategy people who are determining how you're going to execute this fight, start to finish, where you're pushing, you know, how you're doing specific movements and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
How does information go from in-game to them and then back from them processing back to in-game? Is it just they're watching, they figure something out, they let you guys know? Where is the process there of going from
they're watching,
here goes
I'm watching
blind
them.
footage? Yeah. What's the process I'm saying of going from like here's raw footage to here's a strategy?
Literally from like, I don't know, I just do it in my head. Like
Okay.
literally all of it. Literally everything you just said, I do in my head. And
Right.
I obviously use them as a resource. And I always want input. I don't care if I'm right or wrong. Like if someone comes up with a better idea than me, obviously I'm glad to sack whatever I'm doing in the case of doing something better. So everyone's I would say everyone in the guild is very involved as far as like actually figuring and like doing stuff. It's a big team effort, but when it comes down to the actual strategy, the implementation, the communication back and forth between what works and what doesn't is just me. I just do that. I don't know how else to describe it.
Because the point that I was struggling to figure out is how that dynamic works when you've got so many different people all contributing to the same thing, and you can
it's
have
impossibly hard. In
issue.
fact, in a lot of cases, it's the too many chiefs and not enough Indians thing. There's actually only about 3 or 4 people I think that have a major input on strategy, and the rest of the people, we have people in our guild that are among the most valuable people in our guild, and they barely say anything. And I've recruited them because they're just so insanely good at following orders and playing their class. Exactly, right? So like, it would be, I mean, if you had 20 people like me in the raid, it would be a dysfunctional mess. It wouldn't work. You need someone like me. You need some people. And I think I do a good job of surrounding people that help fill in while I'm very good at things, I have a lot of faults. I'm not very detail oriented. I'm terrible at being organized. I surround myself and hire people to fill in the spots that I'm bad at. And they kind of all work cohesively at the same time. So yeah, that's kind of how it works. I've also delegated a lot of things recently to more focus on being exactly good at what I'm good at. However, interestingly enough, in the sake of getting better, we actually had, I think we actually messed up this tier over innovating. I like shifted a lot of my raid leader privileges or my raid leader like roles, and I basically split them in half with like someone else. And that definitely was an over optimization. I was less involved in the fight. I was out of my comfort zone a little bit. It was like something we did in an effort to get better, but taking me more out of the picture did not help us. Even though it was done for all the right reasons. So like there's always things like that happening, and then also like morale is something that's huge in our guild. And that's not too much to do with me. I think we actually got really lucky because I've never recruited someone based on their personality. I've recruited them for being good at the game, but we just like Titan Forge high rolled hilarious people. Like there's just so many, so funny people. If you ever listen to our raids, you've been able to hear that. There's so many funny people. Like, and that helps too, because like during progression, you have like, people can keep it light while you're solving problems in a way. So
I think every WoW guild should have a Shack who can just break the tension at any
absolutely.
moment.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. Well, since we're like already like almost 50 minutes past the expected time, I guess we can go ahead and start wrapping.
Who cares?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want to keep going, I'm here, man. We can just keep going for a while.
Time limits on things like this should be limited to the time in which things are interesting.
That's true.
People are watching this because it's interesting. If it's rambling on and it's not interesting, then it's time to stop it. If they're actually legit good questions and people are learning stuff, then that's fine. Obviously, there's an extent to that. But I mean, I don't know, 3-hour podcast is fine.
But yeah.
So I do have a question that I'll hijack the show for then.
Sure then.
Because this is something that I wrote down, but we never reached. And I was gonna be bummed if I forgot to ask it. So I know WoW on a surface level, obviously enough to do like cutting edge mythic, but nothing at a even close to a podium level. So I'm not familiar enough with this topic in the WoW world first scene as I am in the Final Fantasy world first scene. But the concept and the ability to data mine in Final Fantasy is very powerful. And a lot of people tout Final Fantasy Prog as being like, oh, it's the one true blind experience. I will share the unfortunate news with the world, who should already know this by now. No Final Fantasy tier is 100% blind because of data mining. There is a lot of information available before you're actually able to even enter the raids. And I know how it operates on the Final Fantasy side of things and how the accessibility of it, but I've always been curious about on the WoW side of things how much something like that. And obviously, it's a taboo topic, right? Because nobody wants to highlight data mining. But like, how much of an impact does that have at a top 3 level on who's finishing gold, silver, and bronze?
Well, it's weird because the data mining in WoW is alongside a visual of seeing it on testing, where in Final Fantasy, you're data mining something blind, which is, I mean, in so many ways, it's totally different. It definitely matters. I would say a lot more emphasis goes into just making sure you're fully correct on what class balance is going into a raid. And some stuff is data mined, but you can actually go on PTR and test it. The sims in WoW are really inaccurate. Sims in WoW were basically developed to basically test your own character. It gives you a relatively good sim to simulate what you would do in a fight, and you can swap in and out a trinket. You can swap in and on a set bonus. You can swap this. What's my best gear, right? Like, that's what sims are for. What sims have never been for is relatively comparing classes between each other. So they're terrible at that. So finding class balance is stuff that we organically have to go in and test and find out. And guilds usually have different ideas, but some guilds majorly miss on classes because they didn't do that research. So bringing it back to data mining, that's something to where, like, yeah, when usually raid stuff, do we like raid? Because like we'll go into a raid and we maybe I could share it with you. There's like a Purging Protocol was a raid damage event that occurred on the 7th boss on this raid, and we did so much math to figure out exactly, and we calculated every class's personals with avoidance and everything in the game to figure out how you could live 4 to 5 Purging Protocols on progression with a relatively normal raid comp, right? And then we data mined right before the raid came out that they buffed Purging Protocol by 20%, had to redo all of it, right? So that's being data mined, but the thing is like, yes, we data mined that multiple days before Wowhead had it public, but Wowhead does put it public. before it matters. So like you have that all data mined. We have a guy that's in our guild named Siori who raids for us, and his main role is being that kind of like a data collector outside of raid. And that guy just scours like the WoW database, and we have access to that information way before WoWhead does. And it rarely makes a huge impact during progression, though, I will say.
That's interesting. Okay. I think, and I see this going through chat right now. I don't want to highlight things that I actually have a very strong distaste for the amount that you can data mine in Final Fantasy. I've been pretty vocal about that over the years. So I don't want to give people ideas, but what I will highlight, because I think it's important to highlight and not ignore, is chat. Some people in chat seem to think that data mining in Final Fantasy is just icons and tooltips. I can assure you it's much more than that. It's much more than that. And to think otherwise is unfortunately ignorant, but it's something that I think there should be less of, and I would like to see less of. That's why I was curious how it operates in the WoW side of things.
Do you have people that are like dedicated data miners in your community or in your guilds? That like that's like
usually
what
on the
they
teams.
do?
It's usually on the teams themselves. There's a specific person. Usually,
Really? That's fascinating. Yeah. That's fascinating because a guild could actually have a big advantage by having a better data miner, right?
That's happened tons of tiers. Yeah, I think that.
That's fucking cool.
I think it's usually the top. I think
fun.
Usually the top teams both. I don't know why I said both. As if there's only two, but Freudian slip there. But I think the top teams all have their hand in it in some shape or form. It's just because Final Fantasy has been in this weird kind of arms race over the last couple of years of you have to maintain in order to compete, else you risk falling behind. Whether it's a plugin or whatnot.
Now the problem with all of this is that all of these arms race tools that we're talking about are under this blanket gray area. So nobody talks about it. Absolutely nobody. For fear of punishment by death.
Oh. I see that's an issue. I've since in the recent years and hopefully people have kind of picked up on this. In the recent years, I think it's been important that like people do start talking about it a bit more, because it's all something that everyone at the top level hates. Like I can speak for basically everyone. We would all 100% prefer to walk into a boss 1000% blind than what the game currently is. So nothing's going to change as a step towards that unless people talk about it. So just like hiding this stuff under the rug of like the strength of plugins or the strength of data mining, I don't think is helpful in any way whatsoever to the game's progression health, like world progression health. Because it can be so much better.
Yeah, what I will say though is that there have been recent changes to certain fights that are historical fights, not relevant ones now. They've gone and obfuscated data in them in really new and unique ways so that you cannot data mine them. They have it so that when you zone in, that is the moment you get sent all the fight information.
Okay, well that's good then there.
So hopefully that applies to everything.
Yeah, I mean, I won't ever talk about that because if someone in my chat brings up like, yeah, have you heard about like data mining in Final Fantasy? I'm not going to be like, yeah, I talked about it with these people that really know what's going on. And they said this and this and this, because then they just be like, no, you're fucking wrong. That's not happening. Like, so like, you got to like avoid that crowd for sure. But all right, that's fine. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. All right.
Cool and not cool. This is how I put it.
Yeah. All right, cool. I think I'm good. I think I got all the questions I got answered.
All right, good. Sfia, Layla, you good?
I mean, this has been very, very, very informative for my end of things. I've been very appreciative of it. It like the crossover meeting of the minds is something that like a lot of the people in Final Fantasy have always wanted to have a sit down about, because a lot of the like players, Final Fantasy came out in like 2013, right? So WoW had existed for so long already, and some teams like literally modeled themselves after what was working over in WoW. So like I know, speaking firsthand, I took a lot of tips from just watching how like guilds back in MoP, like Method, Paragon, Blood Legion, how they operated, just to like get an insight of like how do you even start something like this. So having an actual formal sit down, going over with somebody who's very involved at a #1 level has been really, really fun for me. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been really fun for sure. Oh, small question before we leave. Not a super long answer. Can I use damage meters on my stream without getting banned?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
I mean, it's very popular on Twitch right now.
Okay,
again,
cool.
it's a gray
Yep.
area. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. As long as I don't like shit on someone in a random pug for doing bad damage, I'm good. Okay.
That's
Yeah, if you
yeah.
really wanted to, it has a it has like a blur thing. If you really want, if you're pugging, you can like blur out names that aren't your own. Like it has an actual feature on
Oh my
itself.
god, what would happen if I was like pugging with damage meters up and someone was doing bad damage and people in my chat were flaming them and I said nothing?
That's a big problem. That would be a big problem. But there is a
big blur.
Fairly certain there's a way to blur it. But
yeah, you can have it so it doesn't show anyone else's name but your own.
yes.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, like, just in the end, like, I'm gonna do it because I think it'd be more entertaining, and also I want to see that information. Second of all, if I get banned, I mean, fucking so be it. You know, that's you know, my road ends here.
The worst that will happen.
It was meant to be. You know.
You might close some opportunities directly with Square Enix, but you're not going to get banned, right?
Oh yeah, I don't care about that. Yeah,
so
all good.
But yeah, so while we're wrapping up and everything, I want to make sure everybody has a chance to say where people can find him, although it's been on the screen the entire show, just so we can go ahead and go through the motions of everything here. And I'll leave Max for last here for final words and saying where you can find him and everything else. But Sfia, would you mind telling everybody where they can find you?
Oh, right. I stream semi-frequently on Twitch, just twitch.tv/Sfia. And my Twitter is at FFXIV. Yeah.
Not Sfia, because that's like a soccer thing or something. I don't
know what it is. It's some weird thing. If you look up my name, it's you get.
I added you
shit.
once, and yeah, that was a disaster.
Yeah.
Don't
All right.
do that.
Layla?
Yep, I'm on Twitter. I also stream periodically. I have been streaming more regularly lately, just because I took like a 1.5 year break from the game, and I come back, so I just had like content overload. Like I had the entirety of Shadowbringers worth of content that I've just been speed running through on stream, and that's been a lot of fun. We're still like not even halfway done with that. So if like I'm getting a lot of blind experiences right now, going through stuff, so that's a lot of fun. So I have been trying to stream that more. It's just my Twitch, ClopsGG. You can check that out. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And sorry, I put Maximum there because it's Maximum like everywhere, but
yeah, there's a Twitch user with the name Maximum that has been offline for like 8 years, and I just cannot get the name. So here we are.
Hey man, there's a channel that was made called MogTalk that has never went live and is just there, has 2 people viewing it, and I'll never get that name just because they claimed it and I just wasn't quick enough.
That's tragic.
Yeah. And by the way, it doesn't matter how like perceived important you are at Twitch, they will not do anything about that. They're very strict about that. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna stream later today, I think. Maybe even like right after this. My Twitch is the name. It's there.
Yeah, the limit, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter too. That's it.
Okay, that's it. That's it. That's all you got. Well,
yeah.
I want to say some last words here. You guys have all been fucking fantastic. This has been a great show. I'm really glad we're able to get you on here, Max. You know, I love Layla and Sfia, but I wanted to make sure we could get all of us in the same room and have this kind of conversation because I think it's really interesting to talk about how the world races, especially as it's evolving in Final Fantasy XIV, and kind of comparing a little bit with what WoW has been able to do so far. So it was awesome to get you on. So thank you again, Max, for coming on. Thank you, Layla, Sfia, for coming on. If you guys don't follow them for whatever reason, you should be following all their channels no matter what, and checking them out. It's all been listed in chat. It's all over the stream. I need to do some special thanks to other people as well. Thank you very much to my wife, Kiara, for emotional support and letting me do this every single weekend without, hating me for it. Thank you very much to any mods out there helping out with the show. Thank you to all the viewers and everyone else. I do have a very short little weird Patreon video. We'll thank people for Patreon as well after this, as well as the little credits. And then afterwards, we're going to do a raid to Max's channel here. Even if he's not live, I guess we'll just go ahead and do it anyways. It'll be like 2 minutes. So you guys can
now he
watch
has
him.
to stream. You just put him on.
Yeah, I mean, shit, I'm sorry. I literally just hit start stream this moment.
There we go. But yeah, thank you everybody again for watching. Now, all we got to do is say bye. So everybody say bye and wave. Bye! Come on, Max, say bye.
Okay. Oh, we have to cue mics. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Oh.
Bye.
That was pathetic. All right. Hey y'all, it's your old pal Moon Bunny here, Bubbles the Moon Bunny. I'm here to thank a couple of our wonderful Patreon supporters, which let me go ahead and get into it. We got Ock Morning. It's a wonderful rating resource website. And then we got Teamcraft. Teamcraft is an awesome website you can use to work with other crafters to make stuff. And then there's Phase Temperance, who puts on awesome PvE events for the community. We also have some really cool people: Antonio D. Fury, Daniel H., Megan C., Nami, Psyche, and Tag. It's just our personal thank you. And if you guys want to help and support just like these wonderful people, just go ahead and check out our Patreon page, where you get these cool little MogTalk mugs and, you know, maybe some t-shirts and hoodies, you know, all that good stuff. You don't have to, but you know, it's there. And so thank you guys all for watching, and until next time, remember, keep cool, hoppity hop, and stay frosty. Bye.